Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The walls were seemingly endless, and only somewhere high above my head did they extend into a vaulted dome. The endless shelves of books on the sides of the room were awe-inspiring to some, but frightening to others, and lamps were already lit on tables here and there. It was gray and rainy outside, so the extra lighting had been on since morning. God, I hope I won't dream about her now. The tall, blonde guy whispered in horror, "Maybe you'll come to your senses now." Someone to his left answered quietly. An elderly man with large, thick glasses looked at them. Not that one could not talk in the library, but one had to be very quiet so as not to disturb anyone. The library did not like noisy guests. It had always been considered an exemplary library and the face not only of the capital, but of the whole country. Finally, another guy came over to the company and they started looking at some books he had brought. "Did you bring books on aviation?" The blonde guy hissed angrily. "You couldn't think of anything else?" "What did you want?" He replied, "Did you want me to bring you the myths of ancient Greece? And anyway, if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here." "What's that got to do with me?" objected the first. "By the way, I'm a loser. I should be pitied, and you're still friends. Didn't you come up with such a task for the loser?" The guy on the left said quietly, "You spent an hour torturing us about what we would do as losers, and you fell into your own trap. Could you take pity on me?" The blonde looked at his friends pleadingly. "Yeah, Ethan, have you ever shown pity for us?" The friend threw angrily. "You wouldn't let us live if we gave up your sick fantasies. Now you'll have to fulfill your delusions yourself." Ethan, Eric, and Brian had been friends for several years. Initially, they had all been in the same year at the Aviation Institute, but if it hadn't been for Ethan's mischief and debauchery, he would have been in his 4th year of full-time study with his friends. Ethan Parker was the son of the mayor of the city. He was a difficult guy. His father had suffered so much with him that when Ethan graduated from high school, he literally wanted to give him to a military school or enroll him in the army on contract. "Ethan," angrily yelled at his son by his father, "will you ever stop? I can't stand you anymore. I'll either disown you or give you a contract somewhere in Africa. Why did you punch James in the face? Let him watch his mouth." The boy replied, "I didn't ask him to meddle in my business. So because you stole his motorcycle, he had to stand there and smile. My dad could barely contain himself. I'd have ridden around for half an hour and put him back." Crossing his arms on his chest arrogantly, replied the son, "Everyone rides on my bike." Ethan was not a greedy guy, and everyone knew it. He shared the last of his money, and for that he was forgiven his sins. "Ethan, that's enough. Matthew said at last, there will be no home for you, that's it. You're going to Boston to study. What do I need it for?" "I don't want to go there. You know how much I hate Boston. I'm done." His father looked at him sternly. "I asked you nicely not to touch anyone in our town, did I? And you? You're nothing but trouble. You'll go to military school." "No, not that." Ethan begged him. "I'll run away anyway, hiding from them and you somewhere." "Well, then you'll have to pay the compensation yourself," calmly replied the man. "Anyone who enrolled in the military and wants to leave at will must pay a fine, and that's a lot of money." "No, not the military." The son was angry. "All right, I'll even agree to go to Boston, but just someplace else." "Okay, the last option I will offer you, aviation." Matthew looked at him seriously. "How is that different from military?" Ethan yelled in anger. "Is that a choice? You're offering me the same option with a different sauce. Shoes, I have no other options for you. His father finished and left the room. "You can study there yourself." The boy was angry. "What will I do in this military? There is strict discipline. You can't beat your face. You can't go out when you want to. I'd rather go to the aviation. If I die during a parachute jump, I'll know later." Although Ethan had to jump several times during his studies, but nothing terrible happened. He went to the engineering faculty, and there they didn't do all that practical stuff very often. Mostly they climbed around the barns where the airplanes were and studied them. For the first few days, Ethan walked around as gloomy as a cloud. They put him in a 3-room apartment, and he was alone for the time being. The next room, a 2-room apartment, was already occupied, and there was a nerd from the village, and he couldn't talk to him about anything. He only thought about his studies. The other guy later turned out to be a real asshole, but Ethan didn't know anything about it, but he didn't like him from the beginning. 2 days later, the door to his room opened and a stranger appeared on the doorstep with bags. He was puffing and trying to hold the door open. "Can you help me?" He shouted unhappily to Ethan. "My mom stuffed half the city into this bag, and I don't know how I got it all in." Ethan jumped up from the bed and helped drag the giant bag. The guys tiredly sat down on the bed. "Eric." The stranger held out his hand. "I'm from Austin." Ethan shook his hand. "Neighbor." "Houston." And gave him the street and number of his house, laughing. "Did you tell me that in case you get lost in Boston?" Eric laughed. "Okay, now I'll know where to find you." At first, Ethan couldn't decide whether he liked Eric or not, but as time went on, he was lucky to have friends in his life. "Let's peel potatoes. We'll cook dinner," said Ethan the neighbor. "Eric, are you serious?" The guide looked at him in amazement. "Can't we go to the canteen? Have you seen the prices here?" He asked calmly. "If I go to canteens, I'll starve to death in a week. So you give me potatoes, and I'll cook something delicious." "Eric, you're a real cook." Ethan was licking his plate tonight. "I don't even have a mom who cooks this good, that's for sure. Where'd you learn how to do that?" "We have one mom, and she has 5 children," answered the neighbor. "I'm the oldest, so I could do everything. Otherwise, we wouldn't survive." Ethan was the only son in the family and had never thought about siblings, but what Eric had told him was a real revelation. In fact, for Eric, studying was of the utmost importance. His mother had no money, but since she was a widow with many children, her oldest son was given a free place to study in Boston. Eric planned to immediately get a job in the evenings and not only study, but also help his mother with money. Because of this, the boy settled forever in Ethan's heart. 3 more days passed, and there was a knock on their door. The boys were lying on their beds and answered in one voice to come in. The door opened and a skinny guy with acne on his face appeared on the doorstep. "Hi, I guess I'm here to see you." The stranger smiled, and his smile transformed the whole room. "Boy, are you sure you're here to see us?" Ethan joked with him. "The 8th grade is in the building next door. Check with the superintendent." The stranger didn't take it as an insult. He laughed loudly and sat down on the empty bed. "But can you imagine how lucky I'll be in my old age?" He laughed. "You will be decrepit grandfathers with big bellies, and it's like I'm still 20 years old." "Well, immortal, welcome." With a serious face, Eric said, "I hope you're not Koshchei." He laughed. "Imagine that, yes." The boy supported him. "Except my death isn't in a needle, and you won't find it." "Judging by the fact that you got into aviation," Eric muttered, "it must be in vodka or heron. You'll probably be on an airplane protecting her from enemies, won't you?" The guys laughed merrily. They were so different, but then again, as they realized later, they were very lucky from it. "Brian, the stranger finally calmed down. I'm here to see you from Waterloo. To answer your question, I don't walk or ski." Thus began a strong friendship between three very different guys. They had a fun life, but because of Ethan's bully character, they got into all sorts of trouble. The most painful topic was the two dorms. The dormitory of the Boston Aviation Institute was not far from the dormitory of the Chemical Engineering University. The war between them had been going on for years, and no one could count how many noses had been broken in all these endless squabbles. But there were always clashes, one-on-one or mob against mob. "Guys, the chemists are coming at us." Ethan came running into the room one day. "We're up on the roof dealing with them right now." "Ethan." Eric gave him a stern look. "What kind of kindergarten? Calm down. Better let's study compromat for tomorrow." "Eric, what is compromatism?" "There is so interesting." He shouted and ran to the roof. "We're going to have fun." There already stood a crowd of guys who at the top of their lungs shouted an unkind message to those who stood on the roof of the neighboring dormitory. "Hey, you better not piss us off," shouted Ethan. "If we come down now, you'll be in trouble." "Fuck you," he said. "You be careful I don't kick your face in." "Hey, hero, I'm coming down and I'll be waiting for you downstairs," shouted Ethan, and the whole crowd cheered him on. They all ran down the steps and out into the woods that surrounded the aviation dormitory on one side. After about 10 minutes, a large crowd showed up, coming out of the neighboring chemistry dormitory. "There they are, let's go that way," shouted someone, pointing at the forest with his hand. "Beat them, boys." The crowd rushed over there, but they were already waiting for them in the bushes, and a real hand-to-hand fight began. Those idiots. Eric cursed as he and Brian ran out into the street. How could they be stopped? It was impossible to get there. But after about 20 minutes the siren sounded, and the guys started to scatter. Brian spotted Ethan near a large bush, and he and Eric carried him to his room. "Ethan, you're a complete fool and an idiot," scolded the neighbor, treating his shattered forehead. Just as Eric stopped Ethan from bleeding, there was a knock on their apartment. The guys fell silent. "Cover your head and sleep," Eric ordered. "Brian, put that away quickly and sit on the bed." Voices were heard in the hallway. They were asking the neighbors about something. There was a knock on the door. "Hello. There's been a big fight here," the policeman said. "We're looking for witnesses." "Yes, we just got home from work," Brian answered calmly. "Ethan is already asleep. Look at this." The policeman looked into the room. The commandant was staring at the guy who lived in the two-bedroom. He was smiling evilly. "What a bastard," Eric thought to himself. "Now we'll know who the snitch is." The check went away, and the guys breathed freely. Ethan finally came to his senses and started moaning. His left arm was dislocated. "What an asshole," scolded Eric at him. "Why the hell did you go in there?" "Don't yell, it hurts enough," Ethan said through his tears. "Try to pull it out." Eric and Brian gently twisted his arm, and Ethan felt as if something had fallen into place. After half an hour, the pain began to drain away. Only the swelling remained. "Ethan, let's stop with the fighting," Eric said sternly. "You'll get us all thrown out of here, and we've got a real snitch in the next room." I'm sure Bob called the superintendent. Ethan had caused his friends a lot of trouble, but neither Eric nor Brian had ever held a grudge. The kid barely made it from a C to a C, and that was thanks to his friends. Brian wrote him lectures when he missed class. Eric was good at mechanics, so theory and compromat were on him. So, the guys lived cheerfully for almost 3 years, But at the beginning of the 4th year, Ethan got into the wrong place again and was finally expelled. One day, the course was to have a very serious control work. There was a rumor that everyone who didn't do well on it was going to be expelled. Eric and Brian, of course, were worried, but fortunately or not, Ethan accidentally went to the teacher and on his desk saw the answers to all the problems that were in the test. The guy quickly took a picture of everything. He wanted to carefully distribute the answers to all the guys in his group, but Ethan got excited and went to the restroom with Brian to discuss it. "Brian, don't worry, we won't get caught," his friend assured him. "The important thing is that we have the answers, so we'll make it all fit somehow. Imagine if half of us get expelled." And as luck would have it, Bob was in one of the booths at the same time. He waited until Ethan and Brian left and went to the dean, who listened to him but didn't say anything. Maybe that was to the dean's advantage. The quiz went well with no F's in the group, but a few days later the dean approached Ethan. "Ethan Parker, you're expelled." Dryly, he said, "You peeked at the answers to the test, which means that you would have written it by 2. The guy ran to his classmates to find out who turned him in, but the guys denied everything. No one could understand anything. "Ethan, why would we fail you?" said one of them. "You did all this, not only for your own sake, but for ours as well." Suddenly, Ethan saw Bob at the window, smiling and whispering to himself. "You did it, didn't you, you bastard?" The boy grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. "You asshole, why did you do it?" At first, the roommate was very frightened, but then looked intently into the guy's eyes. "Yes, life from you, there is no life." Coldly, he said, "I've had enough of you, so be it." Ethan clenched his fist and swung, but the boys quickly grabbed him and led him out of the classroom. Ethan didn't say anything to his father, of course. He knew he could recover, but it would take a lot of money. The boy didn't want to ask his father for it. Ethan got a job at a construction site to earn money and transfer to a correspondence course. He lived at the guy's place, and they had not moved anyone else in for 6 months, so he had no problems with housing. The only one who created them was Bob's neighbor. He'd written to the superintendent several times that Ethan was living there illegally, but it had all been easily solved with money. The guy was afraid that he would go higher and then he would definitely be evicted from here. "Ethan, he'll get his way sooner or later anyway." Eric sighed. "We have to do something about it. Yes, there's not much time left till the end of school, so maybe it'll pass," answered Ethan. "I talked to the dean of the part-time faculty, and they're willing to take me on as a 4th-year student. I'll even be able to pass the winter session, but I have to pay first." "Ethan, come on, talk to your dad," Brian suggested. "You can tell him that I'll borrow money from you and pay him back little by little. I'm afraid he'll take me away from here, or he'll put me in the army out of spite." Ethan answered with annoyance in his voice. "That's why I need to be reinstated as a correspondence student, or else I'll be in trouble." "Well, how much money do they want?" Eric asked. "Well, not $1 million. "No, of course not," said the friend. "First 30, and then they said we'll see." "Ethan, it's still nothing." Eric rejoiced. "So let's do the math. If we add up what you, me, and Brian have, we'll have 15,000. I'll tell my mom that I can't send her the money until Christmas. The 3 of us need to get good jobs now so we can get it all together in a month." Eric, Brian, Ethan wept. "You guys are real friends. I love you so much. I'll pay you back later." A couple days later, a good job came up. The guys have already tried to do repairs of apartments, but this time they were offered to do a Euro renovation in one 4-room apartment. "If we tense up, we can do it in a month." Eric reasoned. "Ethan, you start in the morning, and Brian and I will come to you right after the lecture. The guys worked hard, and after 2 weeks they had already done quite a lot. The owner liked it and paid them part of the money for the work. Guys, he gave us $1,000 on top. Brian was happy. At least we'll have a decent meal tonight. It was about 5 p.m., and the guys wanted to work a couple more hours. The money they had gotten today not only warmed their pockets, but also their souls. If I met a charming girl now, I would marry her. Brian said dreamily, smearing plaster on the walls. It's been a long time since we've had this conversation. Ethan rejoiced Brian. What's she supposed to be like? Fat, skinny, blonde, black-haired? Ethan, I honestly don't care. The boy laughed. Of course, a Triton would hardly fit. I don't think fat girls would look good on me. He looked at his skinny body. With your anorexia, a fat girl wouldn't fit. Eric backed him up. If you pick her up, Brian is finished. He laughed. Well, why don't we look at it from the other side? Ethan said, holding back a laugh. We need to change the rules. Let the girl carry Brian in her arms. The boy couldn't calm down. I can picture it. I'm clutching her neck like a little kid, and she's carrying me to bed. Brian, and not just to bed. Eric said through his laughter, let her carry you everywhere, to work, to home, to the kitchen, to the cottage. Oh, I don't like this kind of family life, Brian sighed. To be honest, I would like the girl to be smart first of all, so that she and I would have something to talk about. You know how much I love to read, so talking about different topics is as important to me as bed. I can imagine, laughed Ethan. Brian's wife says, come to me, my love. Kiss me, and he's like, darling, I need to finish my book first, or we'll never make it with you. Well, you're exaggerating. Brian said offended, I can do this kind of thing without a book. I just wish I could meet a girl like that in my life. Ethan, what kind of girl do you want? Eric asked unexpectedly. I don't think he'd look at anyone but a busty blonde. Blondes, of course, yes. Ethan said dreamily. The main thing is that she has to be beautiful. Eric, are you staying? His friend looked at him questioningly. For me, it's all about character, he replied. I'm in favor of everything to discuss honestly. I do not like in relationships. No games, no lies. What's wrong? You have to say right away. That day, the guys arrived home late. They quickly prepared dinner and opened a beer. Shall we play a game? Ethan suggested. Let's go on some unusual mission. Playing cards, friends light, and doing all sorts of funny tasks, if you lost, was fun, and everyone was happy to support this game. I've got it, the boy exclaimed in delight. The one who loses will have to meet a girl in a very strange place. Where else? Eric said unhappily. In the toilet? Eric, you fool. Ethan laughed. Oh, I got it. In the library. For you, Ethan, it's a strange place, shrouded in mystery. Brian scratched his head. We practically live there. Well, I don't mean a regular library, objected the friend. Let's see something exotic, shall we? Ethan, sometimes I think I know you by heart. Through laughter, Eric replied, well, you're going to say something that makes me want to stand or fall. Just explain to me, how can exoticism be related to the theme of the library? Well, unless it's a foreign language library. Don't even think about it. Ethan waved his hands. You know how much I hate Italian. The one who loses has to approach the girl, and in order to keep up appearances, you'd have to speak to her in Italian, and the thought of it makes me dizzy. I think I'm going to faint. Okay, Eric agreed. The foreigner is out. How about a science major? Brr. Ethan shuddered. I'm sick of aviation, and you're doing it again. All right, if no one minds, we'll stick with the classics. Brian and Eric looked at each other in bewilderment, but he smiled enigmatically. Why are you looking at me like that? He laughed. So the assignment is to meet a girl in the library. And by exotic you mean that she must be a foreigner and you have to speak Italian with her. Eric's friend was being teased. Oh no, Ethan protested. The girl should only be spoken to in English. When the planted fool on Ethan on a mission. Eric winked mysteriously at Brian. Ethan sat with his hair all tousled. Eric and Brian smiled contentedly. You're teaming up, and that's not fair. The guy wouldn't stop. You set this whole thing up so I'd go to the library for once in my life. And more. Brian laughed. Don't forget, you have to meet a girl there. Where am I going to find a beautiful blonde there? Ethan pouted. They're all ugly and have huge glasses, and I'd die just looking at them. We believe in you, man. Eric laughed. You can swing your fists, right and left, but now from the other side, prove your manhood. The guys decided to go to the library to celebrate the end of the apartment renovation. Just in time to talk about Ethan rebuilding. Is that any way to celebrate? Ethan muttered unhappily. Well, can we at least go to a club after this torture? No. The friends said in unison. You shouldn't go clubbing. You're deciding your fate. We're going to choose a bride for you and Hugh. In the library? Are you out of your mind? My friend protested. Do you want me to marry her later? Why not? Eric could hardly contain his laughter. If the girl turns out to be good, then we can think about marriage. Now don't you two get on my nerves. Ethan got up from his bed. The deal was just to meet some girl, that's all. We'll see about that. Brian couldn't help himself. If you fall in love, you'll only go to the library to see her. Ethan regretted that he'd thought of such a task for the loser. He thought arrogantly that someone else would lose at cards, but not him. He was not prepared for such a turn of events. 2 more weeks flew by quickly, and the repair was finally finished. The owner of the apartment paid the students in full and thanked them. The guys were happy to be back home. Well, Ethan, on Monday, you can take a correspondence course, said Eric. I wouldn't even advise you to try here. The dean will only go for the big bucks. John told me that a guy from another class wanted to reinstate. He asked for twice as much money as we gave you. I realized it was a dead end, Ethan sighed. As long as I don't get kicked out of my dorm. The superintendent's a rat, Brian said. But I think we can work something out. The main thing is to keep Bob the snitch out of our business. By the way, I suggest that we go to the library this Saturday, that is, tomorrow. Brian, you're always like this. Ethan howled. I was in such a good mood, and you and your library ruined it. I'm in too. Eric supported his friend. You have to keep your word, by the way. All right, the boy said grudgingly. I hope we're not going to go there in the morning. Will you at least let me sleep? Ethan, there's a long line on Saturday, so you'll have to be there at 7 a.m. to get in. Seriously, Brian replied, but then he couldn't take it anymore and laughed. No one is allowed to get up before lunch tomorrow. The next day, the guys got up. The time was already 1 o'clock. It was rainy October weather outside the window. Why don't we give up on the library? Ethan said hopefully. Look outside the window. It's slushy. It must be so cold I don't want to get up. Uh-huh. Brian scolded. How was kicking me out at midnight in the freezing cold to get a beer because I lost at cards a must-do? Brian, do you remember what I got? Eric jumped out of bed. I sang for an hour with my hand out in the crosswalk like an idiot. So what? But we got enough for a beer. My friend laughed. It was so much fun. Ethan, Brian looked at him seriously. "We have a big favor to ask of you. Don't break the rules. Quickly make some eggs and let's go to the library." The boy realized that there was no way to get out of it, so he got up and silently began to set the table. A few minutes later, everyone was eating breakfast. "Guys?" Eric came into the room quickly with clean dishes. "You have no idea what I just saw. Bob's got some girl in his room." "What a bastard!" Ethan cursed. "I might have knocked on his door, but now would have an argument to blackmail him. Let him open his mouth about me now. Maybe his sister's here to see him," Brian suggested. "Or some other relative?" "Yeah, wait for it," Eric answered. "Then why did he hide her behind the door so quickly? He probably thought I hadn't seen her. It's just that when I opened the door, Bob shoved someone into his room, and I could tell by the long blonde hair that it wasn't a guy." "Okay, whatever. We should be going by now." Brian urged his friends on. "We're going to be late for the best part." The friends quickly reached the subway and took the train. The trip took them about 40 minutes. Finally, the main entrance to the library appeared in front of them. Unfortunately, the guys had to wait a little longer for Ethan to make a temporary pass. Brian and Eric had been here more than once before. The formalities were over, and the friends went to the reading room. Brian went behind the books so as not to draw much attention to himself. "Do I have to read this?" Ethan took the book his friend had brought him. "Jesus and Aerodynamics. Are you out of your mind?" He hissed. "Why not?" "Such literature is good for you." The guy laughed quietly. "You read and look around at the same time." "I've already looked around." Ethan was angry. "There's no one here but men in glasses or ladies of balsamic age or older." "Look over there." Eric gently pointed to the far table. "I don't know." The friend whispered unhappily. "She has at least one plus. She's young." "So, where's the restroom?" "We go straight ahead and then left and then asked." Brian laughed. "Just your way through it." "How do I look?" Ethan stroked his hair with his hand. "Am I a handsome guy?" "Very." Eric clamped his mouth shut to keep from laughing. "Go look at her and win. We believe in you." "Learn, boys." Ethan stood from the table and slowly made his way to the stranger's table. The guy walked and looked around. He wanted to make sure this was the best choice, but unfortunately for him, all other options were for men over 50. "Oh, sorry," Ethan pronounced, inadvertently hitting the stranger's table. "I've been here since this morning, and my head's not working and my legs are splayed." "I understand." The girl smiled. "Granite of science is a damn hard stone." She took off her glasses and laughed softly. "Do you chew on it?" Supported the theme stranger. "Do you have reinforced concrete or just some logarithms?" "I have only atoms and molecules, but they are very difficult to catch." The girl laughed. "Concrete would be better." "Don't tell me you're a chemistry major with a scare," asked Ethan. "Yes," replied the stranger proudly. "Are you there too? You must be a senior, right?" "To my great happiness, no," he replied. "We are not friends with yours at all. We are real enemies." "Ah, you're from the aviation school." The girl smiled. "Honestly, I can't think of anything else." "That's the one." "Ethan." The guy held out his hand. "Well then, shall we get acquainted? I hope you're not afraid to tell me your name because of our blood war." "I'm not afraid." With a grin, the girl replied. "Claire, but I'll tell you right away, I'm not involved in your political squabbles." "Yes, me neither," sighed the guy. "It's mostly for young people, and as you can see, I'm too old for this sort of thing. I'm a fourth-year student, you know." "All right, Grandpa Ethan." The girl snickered at him. I bow before your respectable age, but please excuse me, because I have to finish my essay today. Oh, full of youth, Claire, and I too must leave you. Kiss the girl's hand with a boy. I hope we will meet under more favorable circumstances next time. The smile never left Ethan's face as he approached his friends. The guy, satisfied, sat down in his chair and only now noticed that Brian wasn't there. Did he run to get his books again? Guy asked with interest. Brian probably thought we'd be here until 9 p.m., but I got my assignment done in an hour. You met her? Eric said in amazement. From the way you cooed at her, did she tell you her name? Or maybe she gave you the keys to her apartment right away. He was making another joke. Her name is Claire. Ethan answered calmly, but we can't do anything with her yet, because she belongs to a clan that's hostile to us. Wow, Eric laughed. You two are like the Montags and the Capulets, but I was hoping that our Romeo had met his Juliet. Yeah, she's a dangerous person to be friends with. Ethan objected. She's chemical. First time coming to the library, and so unlucky. Do you remember what they did to me then? The boy looked at his hand. I'll never forgive them for that. Where's Brian? I don't know. Eric whispered. He said he went to the bathroom. Maybe he ran into someone he knew on the way. The friends waited for Brian for over an hour, and finally he showed up. Ethan immediately wanted to leave the library after meeting Claire, but they were nowhere without Brian. Are you constipated in there? In anger, he said. We've been waiting for you for almost 2 hours. Well, you've only been waiting for me for an hour, the friend replied calmly. I had business to attend to. I had an important meeting. In the bathroom? Ethan persisted. Jesus, who could you have met there? We were about to call the police to look for you among all those fat guys. Eric laughed and put his head under the table. He couldn't contain himself any longer. After 5 minutes, everyone came to their senses and went with Brian to turn in the books. I'm not letting you go anywhere alone here anymore. Ethan's friend muttered in the back. Or else you'll have some important meeting again, and Eric and I will be under the table here with him. All evening, Ethan bragged to his friends that he had managed to meet a girl in the library. Ethan, I already know by heart what you said to her and what she said back. Eric covered his ears in protest. Would you shut up about Claire? You said yourself that you and her wouldn't work out. That the chemical and its inhabitants are our enemies, or have you changed your mind? No, I can't live with that kind of embarrassment. The boy said arrogantly. Well, I hope that was my first and last time in the library. Was she even pretty? Brian asked his friend. What color were her eyes? What about her hair? How would I know? Ethan replied unhappily. Did I look at her? You're like a country bumpkin, for God's sake. The friend cursed. Were you going to meet her or buy bread from her? How could you not look at her eyes? I mean, the next time you see her, you won't even recognize her? Get away from me. Angrily, Ethan said. I won't see her anywhere else, not her or your library. The next day was Sunday, and the boys couldn't get up for a long time. It was still raining outside, and there was no mood. After lunch, Brian started to get ready to go somewhere. Are you going out? Ethan asked him. Look at the weather out there. Brian, are you stupid? Why don't you tell me what I look like? Without noticing his friend's words, he looked around. Does this sweater go with these pants? Brian, are you going on a date? Eric said in shock. Judging by the way you're dressed, it's true. Who is she? And why don't we know anything about it? If you hadn't been flapping your ears yesterday, but had been looking around, you would have been so lucky. He smiled enigmatically. Today is my first date. I should definitely buy her flowers, mumbled Brian. Wow, That's news. Ethan opened his mouth. We've been tearing our souls out, making enemies, and he found someone in the bathroom. What's the toilet got to do with it? He looked at Ethan resentfully. I just realized you were no good, and we'd have to wait a long time. I went out for a walk, and there she was, standing by the window. I fell in love with her at first sight. Is she from the chemical industry too? Ethan asked curiously. I guess they're the only ones who go to libraries. I hate to break it to you, but no. Olivia is a biology major. The boy answered, She's in her 4th year, like us. Brian, can I switch with you? Ethan begged. Take Claire from chemistry and give me Olivia from biology. Yeah. Wait. His friend looked at him sternly. I went to all this trouble to ask her out on a first date, and you want to ruin it for me? Guys, Olivia is my destiny. And yours, Ethan Claire. Oh, you're so full of shit. The guy jumped out of bed. At least you tell him we suffered for 2 hours in the library yesterday because of him, and he's leaving us. But each of us will meet his girlfriend someday. Sigh. That's when we'll part ways. It's a good thing Brian found Olivia. We'll see what happens to you when you fall in love, Ethan. You're the one we're gonna have so many tantrums with. When I close my eyes, I see her, my blonde. Dreamily said the guy. What a figure she has. Even in my dreams, she drives me crazy. And what will happen to me when I meet her in Java? Eric, you're probably right. That day, Brian returned to the dorm late. His friends had stayed up late to check in with him. Basically, none of them had been in a serious relationship yet. Guys, I'm crazy about her. Closing his eyes, collapsed on the bed Brian. She and I first sat in a cafe. Then we took a long walk along the main streets. Olivia likes to read too. We couldn't stop. We wanted to tell each other everything about each other in one evening. I think she liked me too. At least Olivia agreed to a second date. I don't know if it's for good or bad, but Olivia is from Boston and lives down south with her grandmother. You guys, she's my dream. Well, there goes Brian's luck. Ethan sighed. Now he'll have a residency in Boston housing, and all I got was some Claire. Yeah, maybe she's from Boston too. Eric laughed. You didn't ask her exact address, did you? Of course she didn't tell you. That's where you should start. Laughing, Ethan approached. Not hello, not what's your name, but immediately, where do you live? And then you decide whether you need it or not. A new week began, and Ethan ran around the dean's offices, collecting documents and writing applications. The money that he and the guys had collected was enough to get him into the correspondence program without losing a year, so Ethan Parker became a 4th-year student of the correspondence faculty. They managed to get the dormitory arranged with the commandant, too. She, of course, was a little insolent, named the initially inflated amount, but Ethan made such a pitiful face that the woman gave up and left him the usual rate. The boy worked hard to pay off his friend's debts. At the winter session, they promised to help him with tests and quizzes. Ethan never said anything to his father. 2 weeks passed, and the boy was on his way home from work. He sat in the subway car and slept. Finally, the train pulled in and he got off. Barely rubbing his eyes, the guy headed for the exit. Hello, Ethan. Someone suddenly spoke up. How are your teeth? Are they still intact? The guy looked at the girl carefully. At first, he couldn't understand what she was saying, but then he realized. Claire from the library, is that you? He said in astonishment. What are you doing here? I live here, she laughed. As you remember, our dormitory is right next door. You live in a chemistry dorm? The boy asked in shock. No, not that. For some reason I thought you were from Boston. No, I'm from the village, answered the girl. I'm in my 3rd year, and I'm going to become a great scientist. How's that working out for you? Looked at Claire, Ethan. Judging by the way you're practicing seriously, it's coming along. No, it's not. Claire laughed. I just love chemistry. I'm interested in it. Are you a future pilot? She asked with interest. Or are you studying law here? Neither, the boy smiled. I study engineering by correspondence. Unfortunately, I had to transfer from a full-time program. I thought at first I would come to Boston, study and work, she sighed, but we're so overloaded that we don't have time to sleep, not to mention work part-time. I thought it was worth it to be patient for the first 2 years, then it will be easier. But no, it became even worse. There's so much ass-kicking, it makes me dizzy. Yeah, that's what college life is like. Ethan backed her up. You know what, Claire? Maybe we should go to a coffee shop sometime. You gotta get away from it all once in a while. Well, if it's just for a friendly chat, I don't mind. The girl answered him. Thursday at 6. Is that okay with you? Claire, can't you just call me by my first name? The guy looked at her pleadingly. I'm sick of this formality. Ethan, can we meet at the cafe on Thursday at 6? The girl laughed. It's not far from here. Deal. The boy held out his hand to the girl. Coffee and cakes from me, and in general, whatever you want to eat. The girl nodded and went into the entryway. Ethan only now noticed that he was standing outside the chemistry dormitory. I'm a traitor. He whispered to himself that he had willingly come into the enemy's camp and surrendered to him. Aviation will never forgive me for this. The guy was in no mood to go up to his room. The guys were already home. Brian was reading some textbook. Eric was making some sketches. Why are you in a mood? Brian asked his friend when he came in. Did something happen to you? Are you sick? I'm a traitor. Ethan said with annoyance in his voice. You have no idea where I was just now. I went to see the chemists. Were you dealing with them again? Eric looked at him in horror. Ethan, did you fight again? Worse, he sat down on his bed. It's all your fault with your library. Come on, let's go. What's wrong? His friends couldn't understand. Did you get caught for the last time you fought? I took a girl there today. Finally, he confessed. Remember Claire from the library? She happens to live in their dorm. I ran into her by chance today. I didn't even realize I'd walked her to the chemistry dorm. I was a fool to invite her to the cafeteria on Thursday. Oh my God, I'm so stupid. Brian threw down his textbook. You should be glad she's coming to your place on a date. Maybe this girl will finally talk some sense into you, and you'll stop being scared of chemistry. I'm not afraid of her, he replied dryly. I just hate her. They're all arrogant and insolent. What's the girl got to do with it? Eric asked him. Did she run on the rooftops with you and swing her fists? Honestly, Ethan, you're like a child sometimes. You're 21 years old now, so it's time to grow up. It's a matter of honor and dignity for me. The guy said, if I started being friends with them, I wouldn't respect myself. Okay, then we'll keep Claire. Eric laughed. Will it save her from your revenge? It's true what Brian said. You should be glad the girl agreed to go to the cafe with you, or you'll be 70 by the time you wait for your blonde. Ethan first decided that he wouldn't go to the cafe, but when Thursday came, he was drawn there by some inner force. The guy just threw on his jacket and went to meet Claire, and it was one of the best evenings of his life. Claire turned out to be a very humorous girl that laughed and joked all evening. Ethan thought he was even busting a gut. The girl's charm was unparalleled. Claire, you're a fun person to be with, Ethan said, barely stopping his laughter. I don't know how your molecules and atoms don't go crazy for you. Oh, Ethan, sometimes they do. The girl laughed. You know, everybody's experiment is going fine, but mine, something explodes or some foam comes out of the test tube. In general, I'm a bit of a chemist, but it's people like you that make geniuses. The guy looked at her and thought, so she has green eyes and long brown hair, and when she takes off her glasses, she becomes very beautiful. What's it like? Ethan was asked curiously by his friends when he returned from his date. Claire is a nice girl, he said. Even though she's not blonde, I like her. She's easy to be with, and she's like she understands me right off the bat. And what about the beautiful blonde? Through laughter said Eric, have you already forgotten about her? No. Ethan looked at him. Even though Claire has green eyes and brown hair, she's beautiful too. It doesn't even bother you that she's chemical. Brian looked at him intently. Not anymore, calmly replied the guy. He lay down on his bed and turned his back to the wall. Something's not right. Eric wanted to make a joke. Ethan must have fallen in love with Claire. After the first date, Ethan wasn't really looking forward to seeing the girl again, but inside he was drawn to her. Claire told him that on Saturdays she was usually studying at the library. So the guy couldn't stand it, and he was going to meet her this weekend. Where are you going so pretty? Ethan asked Brian as he started to get ready. Isn't it your day off? It's a day off. He answered seriously. I'm going to the library. I have to meet Claire. God, who would have thought our jokes would be true? Eric said in shock. Ethan, are you really going to the library for her? Yes, the boy said shortly. You told me yourself that she was going to be my fiancée, so what's the big deal? Or did you, as usual, change your mind? No, I haven't. Brian got up from the bed. We're all for it. I'm leaving for Olivia's in an hour or two, by the way. So, Eric, you're the only one left. But if it happens to me, believe me, you'll be the first people I tell about it. The guy replied and laughed. Sometimes I think it's not me, but she'll find me. Yeah, she'll knock on our door and say, Eric, I'm here to see you. Brian laughed. You've got a referral from the Celestial office, so sign it. Ethan made himself a temporary pass and went to the reading room. He looked around and saw Claire at the far table. The girl was writing something. Hello, he whispered. I see that you have a total lawlessness in the chemistry department. It is necessary to abuse your students like that. Aha! Survival of the fittest. Claire laughed. Ethan, hi. Are you working? Or are you here for moral support? The latter. The guy smiled. God, how have you been sitting here for so many hours? When I look around, I get this image of all these cabinets piling up on top of us and us climbing out from under the books. I thought so at first, too, the girl said, holding back a laugh. I even went over to them to check if they were stable. Were you wobbling them from side to side? Ethan couldn't take it. I imagine you in a construction helmet, overalls, and big boots. Okay, Ethan, stop it. Begrudgingly, the student looked at him. I've got 20 pages to write today. Well, you have an assistant now. The guy sat down next to her. Tell me what to do. Ethan, thank you. Claire smiled. I'll show you, and you dictate quietly. Let's start with this paragraph. Mother of God. The boy said in shock. How am I supposed to read these formulas? There's a hieroglyph here, with sticks coming off it in different directions, and some other stuff on their ends. I don't even know those letters. You don't have to read the formulas, just read their names as they stand in the text. Claire calmed him down. I know them by heart. At first, Ethan found it difficult to pronounce all these names, and it was impossible to speak loudly, but after half an hour their work boiled over. and to Claire's surprise, they finished very quickly. "Ethan, that's it." The girl closed the book happily. "Wow, you and I broke all records today." "Grandpa Ethan, you're still good," she laughed. "God, let's get out of here, or I'm going to burst out laughing." The boys quickly handed in their books and went to the locker room. Claire's mouth was agape with joy. She was so happy that she had written half of her project that she couldn't calm down. "Ethan, we should celebrate." She looked sternly at the boy. "May I thank you and take you out for coffee?" "Claire, I don't mind." My stomach was rumbling so much that I thought the security guard was going to come up to us and charge him with something. The student laughed. "Yeah, he'd give you a stern look and say, 'Could you take the troublemaker outside?' You'd unbuckle your belly in public and wave to him." "Claire, where does all this stuff come from in your head?" The guy laughed. "You have such a vivid imagination. You should write books. But if only books for people who don't want to sleep at night, then yes," she said. "I'll make up stories that will give them insomnia. She's so unusual." Ethan thought to himself, "On the one hand, like a child, on the other hand, she has a great inner strength." The boys arrived home and quickly ran into their cafe. A few minutes later, a hot pizza and 2 large glasses of coffee were smoking on their table. "Ethan, I'm so grateful to you." The girl looked at the guy. "If it weren't for you, I'd be at the library all day tomorrow." The boy looked into her green eyes, and it seemed to him that they had become a big, clear lake, into which he dived, and it was very pleasant to swim in it. "Ethan," Claire's voice came to him. "Would you like some ice cream? The strawberry and chocolate ones here are delicious. I'll pay for it." "Go ahead," he smiled. "But the ice cream will be on me, and don't even protest." Claire was so easy to talk to Ethan that it seemed like they had been friends for years, but that night, the guy had a new feeling for her. "Ethan, what are you doing?" His friends were worried when, without saying a word, he flopped down on the bed and pushed himself against the wall. "Did you and Claire have a fight?" The guy sat down on the bed, looked at the guys, and was silent for a long time, then smiled broadly. "Guys, I think I'm in love." Finally, he said, "I've never felt like this before. Everything inside just sings. My whole body feels so light, I don't even want to say anything so as not to spook this state." It turns out that Ethan is a romantic. Eric whistled. Who would have thought that behind his powerful fists there was our friend's vulnerable soul? "I'm honestly afraid of one thing." Ethan sighed. "Claire and I are like good friends, and I'm afraid that if I tell her I love her, she'll reject me, and I don't want to lose her." "Give her some time," answered Brian. "Women will never tell you the truth right away. They have to trust us first." Ethan and Claire often met not only on weekends, but also during the week. The guy was well aware that he was seriously in love with the girl. For him, this was not a romantic adventure or an affair for a couple months. Ethan, thanks to Claire, had learned a lot about himself. He thought that he could change girls like a glove, but it turned out to be the opposite. Ethan turned out to be a one lover. Except for Claire, he didn't want to see anyone else. The guy was no longer interested in blondes or girls with beautiful forms. In an instant, Claire, the simplest girl, became his dream. The time was approaching Christmas, and Ethan wanted to invite the girl to a cafe to give her a present. Claire had a very busy time. She had to pass all her credits and get admission to exams, but she always found some way to meet Ethan. "Claire, Merry Christmas to you." He held out a small box to the girl. "This is for you. I'm sorry, but I don't have much experience in choosing gifts for girls, so I settled for the classics." The girl opened the gift with curiosity, on the beautiful fabric. Gold earrings in the form of hearts glittered. Claire blushed, not sure what to say to her. "Ethan, they are very beautiful." "Thank you so much," she said seriously and looked him in the eye. "I love you." Unexpectedly, Ethan said, "I'm not rushing you into a decision. I know you need time to think about it, and I'll wait for you." The girl didn't answer him anything. You could tell by the red blotches on her cheeks that she was very worried. After this meeting, Claire disappeared somewhere. She didn't pick up the phone at first, but then she said that she was very busy and asked them to meet after the session. Ethan wasn't himself. Why did I even tell her I loved her? He berated himself. Maybe she only thought of me as a friend, and I'd ruined everything. "Ethan, let's be logical." Eric suggested. "If she didn't like you, she wouldn't date you, so she has feelings for you." It could be that Claire's just scared. If she's as much in love with someone for the first time as you are, then naturally there is a lot of fear. She may be so afraid of losing you herself that she doesn't know what to do. Ethan's suffering for his friends was simply unbearable. What the guys did nothing but do. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't talk to anyone. The guy disappeared all day at work, then did not get out of bed. It was the middle of January when his phone rang. "Claire, hi." The guy said cheerfully, "How are you? I'm worried about you. You asked me not to call you yet." "Ethan, can you come to our cafe tonight?" The girl answered calmly. "I'll be waiting for you there. I'm going out with Claire tonight." The boy jumped up from the bed. "God, I almost lost my mind. I thought I'd never see her again." Ethan was very nervous. He kept thinking about how he should behave with Claire. Dozens of scenarios of their conversation popped into his head, but he realized that none of it was right. Finally, at 7 o'clock, Claire walked into the cafe, the girl holding herself somewhat coldly. "Ethan," she looked the guy in the eye. "You're a good guy, you're my best friend, but is there someone else?" Ethan couldn't stand it. "Claire, are you seeing someone already?" "No," she answered quickly. "That's not the point." The girl looked intently into his eyes. "Then what is it?" The boy persisted. "Your parents won't let you, or are you engaged to someone else?" He searched for the right answer. "Ethan, I care about you a lot." Claire lowered her eyes. "But we'd better break up now, because the longer we're together, the more I love you. But if you meet someone else in your life, I won't survive it." "I don't know how to explain it to you." "Why would I meet someone else, Claire?" Ethan wondered. "I love you. I don't need anyone else. Can you understand that?" "Claire, I can't go on without you. Why should we both suffer now?" "I need you, do you hear me? And I need you." The girl cried. "But I'm so afraid of losing you that I don't want to live." "Why should you lose me?" Ethan was indignant. "Silly girl. Claire, I don't care about anyone. I live because I have you. I don't need anyone else." From that day on, Claire and Ethan began what they call a serious relationship. "Claire," Ethan once said to a girl, "this year let us pass quietly, and the next year, you'll be in the 4th year, we'll get married on May holidays, then you and I will have a year left." "Ethan, I love you so much." The girl kissed the guy. "Then after the wedding we can rent an apartment. You know, one of my professors suggested that I write my thesis for him. So he said that from the 5th year, I can work part-time in his laboratory, we can eat on this money, and on your salary to pay for the apartment. Ethan, I know you'd like me to stay home with the kids, but you know my personality. I can't do it without my chemistry." "I know." The guy laughed. "That's why I'm not gonna say anything against it. When you get tired of your chemistry, then you'll sit at home." The next year, in August, another wedding was planned. Brian and Olivia, after graduation, wanted to get married and have a celebration for their loved ones. Before Christmas, Brian officially introduced his girlfriend to his friends. They celebrated the occasion in a cafe. Ethan, on March 8, gathered all his friends and introduced Claire to them and Olivia. "Eric, you're the only one left," Ethan once told him. "Well, why don't we play a game and come up with some quest for you to meet your dream?" "But I can find her without your cards," he laughed. "It's May, and I have a very good feeling about it." The end of the school year created a big fuss at the Institute. Brian had gone somewhere else, so Eric stood quietly looking out the window. "Excuse me, who's Eric?" There was a melodious voice. The guy turned and saw a short, dark-haired girl, and it was as if an electric current ran through his body. The girl called his first and last name again, and Eric finally approached her. "Hello. My name is Nora Clark." She formally introduced herself. "You and I are being sent to Germany together for an internship." "An internship?" the boy asked in shock. "To Germany?" He couldn't believe what she was saying. "I'm shocked myself." The girl smiled. "My supervisor just told me. He asked me to find you. We need to come to him immediately. He will explain everything to us." The girl quickly walked towards the helicopter engineering department. Eric had so many questions in his head that he could hardly contain himself not to pounce on Nora. 15 minutes later they were there. "Hello, Eric," extended his hand to the guy, a nice stocky man. "My name is Christian. I'm the vice dean of this faculty and a professor at the same time." He laughed. "What do I call you?" "Eric?" "Hello, Christian." The student shook hands with the professor. Well, Eric, I'll keep you in mind for now, and seriously we'll talk after the lectures." The professor spoke quickly. "So you and Nora are going on an internship to Germany this July. It will be more of a familiarization trip, but I'm sure the Germans will still surprise you with something. You will go as a future aircraft engineer and will represent airplanes. There was a competition, and your dean insisted that you be chosen. And from the helicopters, Nora will go. She is a genius in the field of helicopter construction." Eric looked at the girl with his mouth open. They had 2 girls on the engineering first year, but they then transferred, but that the designer of helicopter designer was a girl, and even so fragile, the guy could not believe it. "Guys, she looks like a 9th grader. She even has a childish face." Eric told his friends with delight. "And this little girl builds helicopters. I'm totally shocked. Her supervisor said that she even has 1 patent." "So what?" objected Ethan. "I heard somewhere that one of the developers was a woman, so why not?" "Ethan, do you have any idea how much it takes to design something?" "I was arguing with my friend Brian." A man's head would boil. "I'm really excited about your friend." "Well, she's not my friend yet," he said with annoyance in his voice. "But I wouldn't say no to something like that. Nora killed me at first sight." "There you go," Ethan rejoiced. "At last there will be happiness on Eric's street. You there in Germany, just do not be stupid. Take her to a cafe, somewhere in the park for a walk." "Yeah, wait." Brian laughed. "They will talk about their airplanes and helicopters all day long, and in general, we have a friend who has reached such a high position, and we are still sitting without beer. Ethan, you've got nothing to do anyway. Go to the store. We should celebrate Eric's success. How about something more serious?" The guide looked at his friends. "Champagne or wine?" "No, we have a strict teacher tomorrow." The guys all said the same thing. "He'll blow our minds." The friends were madly happy for Eric. Of course, they realized that the boy deserved it. Eric had worked so hard to finish aviation well that it couldn't go unnoticed. The kid's mother and his siblings were crazy about the news. His neighbors even threw a party outside in Eric's honor. The session flew by quickly, and Eric and Nora went to Stuttgart, Germany, for an internship. The guys quickly found common topics for conversation. They didn't even need to look for them, despite the difference in specialization. They toured hangars and went on excursions together. Nora kept striking Eric. On the one hand, there was a kind of simplicity about her. The girl was from a deep village. None of her parents even had an education, but since childhood, little Nora all the time mastered something. When she was 16, she was already in the village repairing farm machinery. It seemed that there was no limit to her ingenuity and intelligence, but in her dreams, there was only the sky. At first, Nora wanted to design passenger planes, but with time the girl realized that it is not so easy to come up with something new in this field nowadays, and she switched to helicopters and light planes. The chairman of the village made a lot of effort to knock out for the genius, a place in Boston at the Aviation Institute. The girl's lively mind immediately caught the eye. She seemed to be able to solve any problem, and from this side, she took everything seriously. Eric did not know how to approach her at first, and only in the last week he invited Nora to a cafe. "You know, Eric, I really like it here." Closing her eyes, Nora said, "It's so peaceful everywhere. You could easily design something in this environment. Everyone is silent, as if helping you to concentrate on your work. Nora, are your children going to be designers too?" The boy smiled. "Maybe you'll pass your passion on to them in your genes. I'll tell you the truth, I don't know if I'll ever get married." The girl looked at him seriously. "My unusualness, not every young man will suit. Normal guys won't even look at me. So maybe I, like many inventors, will be alone all my life." Nora sighed. "Nora, you're an amazing girl." Eric said fondly, "You really are extraordinary, but that makes you even more valuable." The girl blushed. No one had ever looked at her as a woman. Of course she, like everyone else, dreamed of true love, but guys were never interested in her as a girl. Nora had gotten used to the idea that no one wanted her. "Thank you, Eric," she said shyly. "I'm sorry, I don't get compliments like that very often. You know, you have so many qualities that I just can't list them all." He replied, "But you're also honest, and that's the most important quality for me." Nora and Eric returned home and brought not only a lot of impressions, but also the fire of love that was burning in their hearts. "Nora, I'll have to go home at the airport," Eric told the girl, "but as soon as I get back in the 20s of August, you and I will definitely meet." "Okay," she smiled. "I'll be back in Boston on the 25th, and I'll be waiting for us to meet." They reached the subway and boarded the train together. Unfortunately, Nora's dormitory was in a different location, so Eric didn't walk her home. "Eric, the friends were happy to see us." "Hi, guys. I'm so happy to see you. Let's set the table and celebrate my arrival. I brought you real German beer and their famous sausages. Well, shall we have a drink?" Ethan raised his bottle. "I'm going to kiss you." All evening the friends discussed Eric's trip. It seemed that he had already told about everything, but there were more and more questions. "How is it going with Nora?" Brian asked curiously. "Did it work out?" "I think we're halfway there." He smiled. "But I know one thing, I won't give her to anyone else. Nora is mine." "Well, then you two are serious." Ethan patted him on the shoulder. "Eric, I'm so happy for you, for God's sake. I don't even want to be apart from you for a month." A few days later, everyone went home, each with their own plans. Brian was flying to his parents' house with Olivia to meet them. Ethan's father insisted that his son come home for a couple weeks. Not only was Eric's family waiting for him at home, but the neighbors were already preparing for his arrival. A day later, Ethan and Eric accompanied Brian and Olivia to the airport. It was obvious that the girl was very nervous. "Olivia, hang in there." Ethan hugged her goodbye. "Brian, don't let her get hurt." The guys said goodbye, and Eric and Ethan went home. The latter had to meet Claire in a couple of hours. "Ethan, when is Claire leaving?" Eric asked his friend, "Don't you want to go with her?" "I'd love to." The boy answered with annoyance in his voice. "She and I planned it that way, but my father is bugging me. He wants me to come home right away. Claire is leaving by train tomorrow, and we're going to buy presents for her relatives today. You know, I envy you guys." The guy sighed. "You have everything well, all the crises have passed, and we with Nora, all this is yet to come. It's okay, buddy." Ethan patted him on the shoulder. "Your Nora's not going anywhere. Soon you'll be traveling to yours like this. I wish it were sooner." Eric sighed dreamily. "It's only been a day, and I miss her already." "Well, come in," the man said cheerfully, opening the gate. "How many years, how many winters?" "Hello, Matthew," answered the guest. "Yes, it's been a long time. Finally, we'll have a nice sit-down tonight." Matthew's guest was his old friend Daniel. He was once his classmate, then went to Boston, and after graduation he moved to Houston. When Ethan was still a teenager, they traveled to see them once, but then things got busy and no one had time to get together. "Doris, is that you?" The landlord said in shock, looking at the beautiful blonde. "God, if I had seen you anywhere, I would never have recognized you." "That's how time flies, Matthew." "Doris is already 22. Daniel laughed. The guests and their hosts were cozy on the terrace. Daniel and his family had come for a few days. In fact, it was not a casual meeting. Daniel was a mid-level businessman, so he always had everything calculated. Back in Boston, Daniel started his own business, and from that time on he only prospered. Not to say that the man was the richest man in the city, but he was in the top 5. Matthew, of course, lived more modestly, but in Houston he was not only the first man, but also the richest. "Well, Matthew, Margaret," the guest said calmly, "maybe we should talk about our children's future. I think the time has come. As far as I understand, Ethan will take your place after you. He's a good kid, too." "Thank God Ethan's outgrown it," the mayor answered. "Yes, Doris would be the most suitable match for him. We have no objections. He's coming tomorrow, by the way, so let him and Doris get reacquainted. Neither he nor she are children, so we'll have to start all over again." "Well, that's good." Daniel rubbed his hands together happily. "We'll both benefit from this union." Doris was a willful girl. Her temper was not easy, but what her father wanted most of all was for his daughter to get out of his sight. For a simple commoner, he did not agree to give her, and then he got the idea to remember his old friends. In fact, Doris had already made a name for herself in Boston. She changed guys so easily that the father was from his daughter just in horror. At first he wanted to send her abroad, but he was afraid that she'd make such a mess there that he wouldn't be able to pay her back for the rest of his life, and dumping her on the shoulders of a hot-tempered Ethan would be a good thing. Maybe the guy would cheat on her. In 2 years, Doris has had 3 weddings, then she had a fight with her fiancé, then she was dumped. In general, a good word for the girl in Boston did not remember the girl, and this did not just hurt her father, but directly affected his reputation. After Doris left her first wedding, cursing with the last words of the groom, Daniel was denied 2 lucrative contracts. The man had already been in the manufacturing, disposable tableware business for many years. His factory was doing well year after year, but Doris seemed to be deliberately trying to ruin it. But now we're finally rid of her. Daniel whispered to his wife at night, "We've had enough of our nerves, and it'll be good for Matthew to be related to us. I'll pay good money for Doris." "Oh, I don't know, Daniel." My wife sighed. "We must pray to God she doesn't make a scandal at the wedding." "Yes, we would only have to hold the wedding, and the rest let her husband already decide with her." The man reasoned. "Hello, Ethan." Doris came out to meet the boy as he entered the courtyard. The mayor's son woke up. In front of him stood a beautiful blonde with a lush bust. The boy looked at her carefully. He tried to figure out who it was, but he couldn't. Doris, on the contrary, behaved naively modest. Her father told her that if the girl would behave well, he would give her her car. After the next wedding 3 months ago, her father took away her car and the keys to the apartment, which he bought for her. So the girl tried with all her might to get her car back, as she called it, and finally move out from her parents. Their surveillance has already got to her, and she dreamed of only one thing, as soon as possible to return home. "Doris." She held out her hand to the boy. "Have you forgotten me?" "No." He answered in astonishment. "You've just changed a lot. For the better, I hope." She laughed coquettishly. "Well, welcome home. We've been visiting for a few days now." Ethan didn't quite like having guests at their house, and especially not having Doris here. Maybe Ethan would have been attracted to the girl a few years ago, but now he had grown up a lot, and he looked at life in a completely different way. The only woman in his life was Claire, and he didn't want to change her for anyone else. "Why did you call me?" he asked his father that evening. "I don't think Daniel was crazy to see me. Ethan, you know." Dad was being evasive. "It was an accident. Matthew came first, and then his daughter." "Dad, stop bullshitting me." The boy gave him a stern look. "What do they want here?" "Ethan, you are a grown-up guy, and you should realize that we wish you a better future." Matthew finally answered, "Are you trying to marry me off to them?" The son said in shock, "I have told you many times that I will only marry Claire." "Why do we need your Claire?" The father was angry. "What good is she to me? I'm marrying a decent girl. Judging by the way she looks, there's no dignity there for a long time." Ethan replied coldly, "Don't get on my nerves. I've given you my word. You don't even have anything to blackmail me with. I haven't even taken money from you for the last year." "Ethan," his father looked at him angrily, "don't you dare go against me. There will be no Claire in our house. We weren't going to live with you." The boy replied calmly, "We're staying in Boston, so you don't have to worry about that." "All right, I beg you, stay a few days," quietly asked the man. "When they leave, you can go back to your Boston, dear Claire." Ethan was reluctant to spend another week in the company of guests, but he agreed to his father's request. To Doris's surprise, she liked Ethan. He was a handsome fellow. She tried to hit on him, but he was adamant. The days passed quickly, and the guests left. "But we still have plenty of time until next spring," Ethan's mother said. "I saw them exchanging phone numbers, so maybe they've got it all ahead of them." "Your words to God." My husband sighed. "It would be foolish to lose such a good match for us." A few days later, Ethan left for Boston. The night before, he wanted to talk to his parents. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me." The boy began, "But I'll decide my own fate. If you don't want me and Claire to get married next year at our house, we won't take offense." "Ethan, I'm the mayor of this town," his father answered him. "It's a matter of reputation for me. I won't have my son having a wedding on the wrong side of town. Your wedding will be at our house." Ethan returned to Boston. After a while, his friends arrived as well. A new school year had begun. Brian and Eric were preparing for the last session and writing their diplomas. Ethan continued working and studying part-time. The guys grew up and started to make plans for their future life. Brian, after his marriage to Olivia, came to her apartment. The girl's grandmother was already old, and she needed constant supervision. So they decided not to abandon the old lady. The guy was offered a place in graduate school, but Brian has already looked for a good job, not related to aviation. "Guys, I need to feed my family," the guy told his friends. "And on the dry, I was offered one little thing. The main thing, I will get higher education, and there you can work anywhere. Where I still immediately after graduation, the position of chief engineer at the plant will get, so this is a great opportunity for me." Eric and Nora started a serious relationship. The guy was in a very difficult position. At first, he wanted to return home to help his mother. He had already been offered a teaching position at their institute, but Nora wanted to go to graduate school to realize all her ideas. The boy's mother didn't want to destroy his family. "Son, we will manage here ourselves without you," she said. "If you can, you'll help us. And Kathy will soon come to Boston to study with you." Kathy was the second child in the family, and she, like her older brother, was going to be sent to Boston, but to a different academy. Eric and Nora were planning a wedding the following September. After his studies, the boy wanted to stay on to teach in his department. The institute promised to give him a one-room apartment for the duration of his work. Ethan and Claire didn't want to leave Boston either. The girl really had a talent for chemistry. After graduation, not only did they keep her at the department, but next August Claire was to go to Holland for 6 months because she had an interesting project with an institute there. Ethan was to get a visa to Holland after her marriage. Everything was going well, and they lived together as before, but one day Ethan's phone rang. "Ethan," someone sobbed into the receiver. "I'm asking you to help me, please. I really need your help. Who is it?" The boy said in astonishment. "What happened? What can I do for you?" "It's Doris." He heard him. "Ethan, please come to Houston right away. I'll explain everything to you on the spot." "Doris, what's wrong?" Ethan was worried. "Did the bandits catch you?" "No," she answered. "You see, there's a man following me around. I told him I was getting married soon. He said he'd only leave me alone if he saw my fiancé." "Doris, what's the problem with that? You ask any guy in Houston." The boy laughed. "Or tell your father about him. That's the thing, he knows everybody here." The girl sobbed. "He threatened me and my father." "Ethan, I'm begging you to help me. I'll pay your way. We'll just sit in a cafe and go to my house. Then you'll leave right away." "Doris, I'm sorry, but I can't." Ethan said coldly, "I have so many important things to do. I can't do this. It's not serious." "Ethan, I don't know who he is. I've never seen him." Doris pleaded. "He keeps calling me from different numbers and threatening me that if I lie to him, he'll build up my parents' debts. I wanted to go to the police, but he started threatening me. He just demands that I show up somewhere with my fiancé. This man wants me to prove that I'm not lying to him, that I turned him down with good reason. Ethan, I'm begging you." "All right, I'll come over tomorrow." The guy barely agreed. "Only for half a day, I can't do it anymore." The next day, Doris met the boy in a cafe. She smiled sweetly and seemed so happy. "Ethan, pretend you're courting me." Doris asked. "Take my hand, play like you're kissing me." After the cafe, Doris and Ethan got into the car and she drove him to her house. He ostentatiously entered the entryway, took the elevator up to her apartment. There Ethan sat for about an hour and drove to the train station to get home. After that incident, the guy never heard from Doris again. "Well, Jacob, we'll see who's who." Doris laughed hysterically, taking the card with photos from the man she had hired. "I'm going to marry you anyway." Here was the thing. Doris, after she and her parents had moved back home from Houston, had finally gotten her own car and apartment. And she had, just a few days later, begun a passionate affair with the son of a wealthy man. Jacob, just like her, and had fame all over the city. Both were handsome, but were constantly changing partners. Doris had long wanted to get him, and now her dream had come true. The girl plunged headlong into a new relationship and lost control over herself. A month later, she found out that she was pregnant. Doris wanted to use this argument to marry Jacob. "Doris, you are certainly an amazing girl, but I am not ready for fatherhood." The young man answered her. "Jacob, but I love you so much." She hugged her lover. "We are so good together. Why ruin it all? We'll have a son. We'll be a real family." "Doris, give me some time to think." The man kissed the girl. "I need to get used to having a child." Jacob was an experienced catcher. He had broken so many hearts in his life that he could fool anyone. He decided to wait for a while because Doris might have lied about the pregnancy, and in general, he expected a 3 or 4 month affair. Doris, on the other hand, knew for sure that she was pregnant, and she needed to be proactive. She wanted to show Jacob the pictures of Ethan so that he would be jealous of her and propose right away. Not that Doris really wanted to give birth to a child, but the girl realized that if she had an abortion now, she would definitely lose Jacob. In general, for almost 4 months, the man evaded a direct answer. After Doris showed him photos with Ethan and announced that he offered her hand and heart, it seemed to her that it helped, and Jacob began to talk about the wedding. But after a couple weeks, it all went away, and the man, like a ghost, began to disappear from her life. "I'm sorry, but we can't give you an abortion." The doctor disagreed. "You're already in your 6th month." Doris walked out of the clinic in shock. For the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. She had tightened her stomach as much as she could so that her parents wouldn't notice, but Doris was sure that in case of emergency, she could always get an abortion. The girl never even considered that it might be too late. Doris spent weeks just going crazy. She didn't know what she could think of. One evening, she sat on her bed and drank herbal tea to calm down a little. Suddenly, some pictures that were lying on the table caught her eye. "God, I'm a fool." The girl rejoiced. "How could I not have thought of that at once?" For several days, Doris thought about her conversation. Then she dialed someone's number. "Margaret, hello," she said in a gentle voice. "It's Doris. How are you?" "Oh, Doris. Hi. It's so good to hear from you." Ethan's mother answered the phone. "Margaret," she sobbed. "I didn't want to tell you anything, but Ethan left me. I've been seeing him for months. He came to Houston to see me, and I went to Boston to see him. I love him so much, I'm going crazy. Aunt Margaret, he got me pregnant." "Oh my God," the woman said in shock. "Why didn't you tell us before?" "He's getting married in a month. We've already made all the arrangements. I need to talk to Matthew right away." "Doris, don't worry, darling. I'll call you soon." The girl sat and nervously moved her hands. She was so afraid that she would fail, but after about 20 minutes her phone rang. "Doris?" It was Matthew's voice. "Daughter, listen to me. We're not canceling the wedding, and I'm not telling Ethan anything. If we lay all the cards on him now, he won't come home, and he'll go to Boston to marry Claire. We need that girl to find out, then she'll dump Ethan for sure. Claire won't forgive him for cheating. He's told us that many times. All right, Doris agreed. Then I'll go to his wedding and tell him about it in front of everyone. Could you please talk to my father too? I'm so afraid of him. He's bound to blame me for everything that's happened. Everything was ready for the wedding. On Claire's side, there weren't many guests, just her parents, her older brother, and one friend from Ethan's side. The guests were invited by her father, and Ethan was joined by Brian and Olivia and Eric and Nora. All the guests were waiting for the newlyweds to drive up for the check-in. But suddenly, Ethan's mother took the microphone and asked all the guests to gather. "Friends, I apologize to all of you in a shaky voice," she said, "but we just had no other way to tell you about it. Unfortunately, this wedding cannot take place. Our son Ethan has a girlfriend who loves him very much and who is expecting a child with him." Doris barely made it to the stage with a huge belly. The girl was wiping her tears. "I'm sorry, but I had no other way for Ethan to stop." The girl sobbed. "Ethan, I love you so much. We were so... Eric, I think we have only one way out. Brian once said, we have to trick this girl into telling the truth, which we'll record on the phone. Right now, we need to know if she had a baby or not. Then we need a DNA test, and if it's not Ethan's kid, which I have no doubt it is, we're gonna nail this broad to the wall." A few days later, the guys found out that Doris had given birth a few days ago. "Eric, let's get to Houston," Brian ordered. "Now the hard part. We need to get Ethan's saliva analyzed, but only so he doesn't suspect anything. Ethan?" Eric came up to the guy tonight. "We all got tested for some kind of dangerous virus today. The commandant said it's mandatory. I'll get a nurse for you in the morning." The guys made arrangements with one lab and asked that no one tell Ethan anything. They had half a day to get everything organized. The next day, early in the morning, Ethan's saliva was taken before work. The guy drove to work, and his friends and the lab tech rushed to Houston. "You realize this is a very delicate matter," Matcherly explained to the head doctor of the maternity ward, Brian. "Paul, he was a real hero, invented a new kind of fighter, and the motherland is very proud of him. He was posthumously given a prize of a very large sum, but it has come to our attention that Doris had a child by him. You must realize that we can't give that money to her child without proof. We need to do a DNA test. Well, if that's what the state decides, fine." The doctor finally agreed. "Let your nurse put on a robe and take a test from the child, or then I will be accused of all this, if suddenly he is not his child, and the money was transferred to his account." The guys were very worried, but after 5 days it was confirmed what they thought: there was no relation. "All right, Eric. Now it's your turn." Brian laughed. "We need to nail this woman so that she won't be able to say a word." A few days later, the friends went to Houston again. Ethan was so depressed that he didn't even realize his friends were doing something behind his back. "Doris?" asked a young man in a hat and glasses when the girl opened the door. "Could we have a serious talk with you?" "What do you want from me?" She answered sharply. "I don't know you. I'm Ethan's attorney. We have a DNA paternity test, and you have a criminal record. In your case, you're looking at up to 2 years in prison. Do you know who my father is?" Doris screamed in rage. "Get out of here. I'll call the police. So you'd better get dressed and put the child somewhere, because you will be taken away by the police." Eric answered calmly. "You still don't want to talk to me? My client will stop at nothing to put you in jail for slander. Either you tell me the whole truth, or we will push for you in court for 2 years in prison. What do you want me to do?" Doris was frightened. "Come in. I'll tell you everything." About half an hour passed. In Eric's pocket, their whole conversation was recorded by a cell phone. "Okay, I'll talk to my client, so that he withdraws his lawsuit, leaving Doris's apartment that the guy, "I beg you, please understand my situation. I have a small child." Doris cried, "I think you don't need to worry anymore." The guest calmed her down. "I'll call him now, and we'll stop this business, so neither you nor your baby will get hurt. Goodbye. I will hope for your promise." The girl shouted at him one last time. "Why did you make this mess?" Eric cursed to himself. What's your child got to do with it? A real fool, how can you put a child in such danger? The next day, Eric and Brian waited for Claire near the institute. She was due to leave in a few days. "Claire, I'm asking you to listen to us." A guy approached the girl. "Ethan is not guilty of anything. Here is the proof." The guy handed the girl the results of the DNA test. Then Eric turned on the tape. "Oh my God!" I burst into tears and threw myself on the guy's neck. "Brian, I love him so much I can't be without him." I don't know how I ever survived that. It was almost 8 when Ethan got home from work. Eric and Brian were going somewhere. "Ethan will be there soon." Eric said, "We're going to run to the store next door." Just as they left, the door to the room opened. Ethan was lying on the bed with his eyes closed. "Ethan, I'm sorry." The boy heard a familiar voice and jumped up sharply on the bed. "Claire?" He couldn't believe his eyes. "Claire, I love you so much." He kissed the girl. "God, I almost went crazy. I can't live without you, my love." "Ethan, I can't live without you either." She sobbed. "I don't need anyone but you."
Subscribe and click the bell. Damn it. If the grandmother had heard such a dirty expression from the mouth of her pupil, she would have deprived her of sweets for a week and made her wash her mouth out with soap. But since Grandma was sound asleep at the late hour of 0 o'clock, Camille went unpunished, finally having stopped pacing her room. Exactly the beast of the cage called the garden. The young girl plumped down on the bed, complaining about the creaking. Shell netted from the mushroom in a pile of plush John and snuggled into his worn chocolate-colored fur. Silently she cried. How? But how could she have been so stupid? To fall so low? It wasn't her brain that obligingly suggested the flu, though. There's still time before the immediate fall, namely 21 o'clock 30 minutes. The exact time was suggested to her by the dial of the alarm clock, at which she cast a tear-stained glance. It was in that time frame that she was to report to the abominable. Impossible without a heart of the scoundrels. 2. It all happened 10 days ago. Camille was in the school library. She had just returned the books she had read and summoned the help of an elderly librarian who had been plagued by sciatica from the rainy weather. Samara had them shelved. Petty. There was a mocking voice over her shoulder and a school drill. Way rolled. Coolly turned around. Startled. Because of the height difference, she gave the owner of the voice with her nose somewhere in his chest. At armpit level. "No," she said, abruptly, and through clenched teeth, she dropped her gaze. She looked bold and contemptuous. Stephen is the bully of the whole school, a bully and just the embodiment of all male vices. The distance between the boxes left no room for maneuvering. But Georgia, still out of the back, turned around, involuntarily slid sideways on his thigh, and standing on tiptoe, reached up, and just a little more and the book on the lives of the greatest ancient Greek philosophers would be in place. She decided that she would just ignore Stephen, not give him that pleasure. Grandmother, by the way, even in the mind forbade to swear, but granddaughter in the mind to do it to herself aloud. Because it was so, because life turned out to be so, that sometimes she felt emotion, and it was impossible to do anything about it. Camille repeated to herself that she did not care that he continued to stand. Behind him, he must be squinting mockingly, blue eyes so piercing it seemed he could see right through you. A rustling sound was heard. Stephen apparently scratched the back of his blonde head. What unseemly habit? And then he suddenly intercepted the book from her, yanked it out of her hand, and slid it back onto the shelf himself. I didn't ask for it. Before she could finish, she choked on air because he immediately grasped her shoulders firmly and turned her around to face him, literally typing her back into the shelf. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to talk about. Unexpectedly for herself, menacingly raised her voice and immediately remembered where she was, went to a whisper, leave me alone. That's how it is. After all you've done, it's no different than teasing. He lowered his voice too. By the way, you've caused me so much damage. You're a firing squad. Calling everyone up to the director. Losses. Who could even come up with trading answers for tests? Businessman, Stephen snorted. You're a dishonest man. You're a liar. You tell me you're not a gentleman. His hand suddenly moved from the girl's round shoulder to her thin, tall neck. His fingers ran along the edge of the snow-white legs, the collar, the decorated dress, as if to feel and outline the contour of the collarbone. Is that what it is about you? You seem to dress like a grandmother and act like one. What are you doing? The girl whispered. Her voice was quiet, barely audible. No longer out of habit of observing the rules of the library, but out of a strange numbness that spread through her body from the places Stephen touched. He grinned, but with only his lips. His eyes were cold. Nothing to do. He pulled away, took a step to the side. And so there was finally some distance between them, an obsession that had subsided. Nothing to do. Camille gasped for air. Stephen stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans, on top of a t-shirt with some soccer club insignia and a black jacket. Dry, clearly 2 sizes too big. Despite his tall height of almost 190 centimeters, the guy was not very broad in the shoulders, and was terribly self-conscious about it. But he kept it a secret, of course. Stephen was the storm of the school, elusive and yet a known bully in the neighborhood, but on his half. He was also a repeat offender with a history of being held back in 3rd, 6th, and 8th grades. It was hard to know what was the ugly truth about him, and what was a scary rumor. But in any case, it would be hard to find a person more opposite in qualities and peculiarities noticeable at first sight in comparison with Sophia. And she, like him this spring, turned 18 years old at the very beginning of the season, when the first drop just appeared from the roof. Except that while Stephen looked all of 20, Camille was considerably younger than her age. The principal, the vice principal, handed out in the cafeteria, and some other people cringed at that. They loved to compare them. That's how unlike a schoolgirl is to her peers. Camille's grandmother, Emily, who for 10 years had also been her guardian after the death of her parents, who died in a car accident, and her only relative in the world, took care of her. 2 people from very different eras inhabited the 3-bedroom Stalin apartment. In her working past, Emily taught history and literature. For almost 30 years, she had lived in the far north. Her pension was decent. She had enough to live on, as they call it. However, an outside observer could decide that the life of the grandmother and her granddaughter was peculiar, if not to say very strange. Camille received an exceptionally strict upbringing at home. Grandmother had no doubt that the modern world cannot trust a child. Overmullet, young, stupid creature will destroy the soul, morality, cripple, future. Emily herself kept to herself. She socialized only with a few worthy, in her opinion, people around her age. And if there was someone who had the audacity to say that she treated the child wrongly, that person received such an angry, logically constructed, and reasoned response that he himself was to blame, and in general shame on his head. And in time, the neighbors got used to it. After all, every family has its own rules. Everyone knows that. And since Emily's pupil was clean, clothed, and did not freeze, was always fed in winter, well behaved, since Emily herself had a reputation for impeccability. For the last 50 years, then with time everyone calmed down, and even invited a little began to envy. After all, Emily had raised a granddaughter, so she's a golden girl, not at all like the modern kids of the family unit, just a little lady, not a girl, until 5th grade. Camille was homeschooled, and then she went to school and became a white crow. Teachers, though, praised her diligence and gave her A's. One day, I only got a C for my essay on how I spent my summer. In it, a 6th grader described how she had spent the whole summer reading works on world economics and the history of capitalism. The teacher said that it was very informative, but I would like to know about personal, so to speak, life, impressions, and adventures. Were there only books all summer? Camille then boldly replied that her grandmother has an Alex Schwartz acquaintance. He has an anniversary. He is 90 years old, and he just wrote those very books on the history of capitalism. That's why it was necessary to read them all. And then, based on the results, so to speak, to write a poem and give it to the Jubilee. Everything else is in the background of such an important matter. Selfishness and vanity. If Camille had said this one-on-one, the teacher might not have been angry. But the confrontation happened in front of the whole class. The class burst into laughter, and the teacher gave the girl a C. That C made the girl sick. She got so hysterical, she ended up fainting. We had to call an ambulance. Naturally, the teacher replaced it with a B out of harm's way. But Camille spent a long time pining and telling everyone that she was a loser, since her essays had only gotten a measly C. But it wasn't just the specifics of her studies that made her stand out. She dressed very originally. Naturally, her grandmother was in charge of her closet. It consisted of good new things, except that they were made according to the fashion of the 30s of the last century, and that they were clothes are not the most fashionable dressy styles in that era. Shoes were also selected the most modest. Flat shoes were not a brand. Classmates grew up, became teenagers, young girls. They learned to use cosmetics, went for manicures, had their hair done. Camille couldn't afford any of that. Not that she didn't want to. Sometimes she thought her grandmother was too strict. But then she remembered that Emily had a weak heart and that life in the modern world was not sugared just because of such loose morals. And any rudiments of Charlie's rebellious sentiments were just wheat. Without water, the heat of summer. However, Camille was not one of those dunces who can only be transformed by a beauty parlor. By adulthood, the girl's figure has acquired feminine, soft, and lush in the right places outlines. She had a slightly elongated face with high sharks, straight nose, and wide sensual mouth. Gray eyes dazed, black fluffy lashes, long brown hair no one had ever seen. Tucked otherwise in one of 3 hairstyles, 2 braids on the sides, 1 braid in the back, or 1 braid arranged in a wreath around her head. Add to that refined manners, shyness, modesty, and a habit of keeping in the shadows of everything bright, noisy, flashy, and modern. And also the fact that almost all her interests and daily activities filter only through her grandmother's opinion of whether it is worthy, whether it is decent. And if some meticulously outside observer were to analyze Camille's exactly outlandish exotic mess, he would easily find in everything the reason why those around her perceived her as a strange person. That's putting it mildly. And only in exceptional cases, such as in clashes with Stephen, who for the past 2 years had increasingly made her the object of his attacks. Light, but offensively barbed. Only on rare occasions did her usual calmness come off, and she began not that she would never be boorish, but would reply sharply and defend herself vigorously. "So you have nothing to do," Camille repeated. "Then go and study, you asshole, or help out in class 3. Someone broke a window. It's blowing. The kids need help." Aha. You're fast. Stephen has his usual smile on his face. "No, you're still acting like a grandmother and thinking the same thing. You know I've sorted out my problems, don't you? I'm not getting expelled. Thanks to Emily. She covered for me with our homeroom teacher. She realizes, if you give her the benefit of the doubt, that yes, Emily, she has 4 kids. She's a kind-hearted, fair person. You don't believe me. You want to bet on the test, and on Christopher we'll put 5, because his daddy brought her candy and something else. This guy was an incorrigible 2-timer, and no one in the class did not doubt that on the final test in math you will fail. Camille, of course, had heard of the couple, or rather, she had read about them. In some books, they were made by noblemen, and usually it didn't end well. There was no way she'd agree to some stupid bet, but today was not a good day at all. First thing in the morning, the grandmother thought her granddaughter had spritzed her granddaughter with cheap perfume. The girl swore that to grandmother's toilet stable did not go near, but she still made her go to the bathroom to wash off. Then it turned out that the grandmother just thought that in the closet there was a moth, so she put perfume in it. That's why Camille's clothes smelled. The grandmother didn't apologize, and her pupil felt unjustly offended. Then before school, she ran into a store to get tights. It was not a boutique, but a very modest youth clothing store. And this was where she and her grandmother sometimes came in when they needed to buy something that Emily had sewn but couldn't make at all. Usually it was something outerwear. This time one of the salesgirls didn't, as usual, just observe her from afar, but came up to her chest. The girl thought that she probably did so because her grandmother was not with her now, or she would never have dared to approach her. Grandma hated all sorts of consultants and knew how to drive them away quickly. The saleswoman talked about the fact that here our new products arrived. Youth clothes, very stylish denim skirts, and blouses beautiful. Camille glanced at it and turned away. No, even if she herself had been wearing what her grandmother sewed for 2 years now, there was no way she was going to upset her and dress differently. Pity, the girl sighed behind the back of the sales clerk, sharing with a colleague. What kind of savagery is this? How will she live when her grandmother is gone? Will be lost with such an attitude. Generally not adapted to life. No, she'll be left without an apartment or all those who beckon and where only the neighbor's teachers look. It was hard, painful to hear that. And yet Camille couldn't help but recognize this woman as Evelyn. I saw the name on the counselor's name tags. She's got a point. It was really creepy to think about the time when she'd be alone. Grandma had been talking a lot lately about how she would soon be taken to heaven by her grandfather, and she, Camille, if she misbehaved, she would end her days on the panel. So to prevent that from happening, she must study hard, behave herself, and be a man of honor. What's the bet? Camille blurted out before she could even think about what she was doing. That's a different conversation. Stephen's voice had a sort of muzzled, jubilant edge to it. Let's say if you're right, and Christopher fails, I get the money back that I won in the cleanup card. Camille nodded. That would be very good, just wonderful. Because Borka was a third grader, from a large family, and he'd lost everything he'd saved in pocket money for 6 months, and I'll sign up as a volunteer and go to the city park to plant trees. And I'm not gonna swear. Yeah, I'm in. Wait, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. You didn't even ask what you'd owe if you lost. And what do you want? She opened her eyes with her wrist. How did the burn not hurt? The grip was barely noticeable. It was some other strange perception of his closeness. You agreed to the bet, did you? But I did. You know, I don't really follow you. I don't have to. But I remember you said something in literature class about keeping your word, something about honor. I did. The girl exhaled and tensed, getting ready to pull her arm out, which means you keep your word. And if you lose, you'll come where I say and spend the night with me. Why the squeaky armor? Theoretically, the guy was very clear. Except in my brain, it's like an automatic system kicked in. From the logical decoding of this phrase to spend the night. Why should I come to you for the night? But do not pretend that completely stupid. You understand everything, he said simply. And then he let her go, winked, and disappeared, as if dissolved among the racks. Gru was not left standing, barely breathing. You look in front of you. Oh no. What's going to happen to her now? How could she? How dare he? The girl clapped heavily. Was Stephen not enough of the atrocities he was doing? Why is he with her? For what? Here. And where a librarian appeared in the aisle. Having instructed the polite girl to arrange the books, She lined up for a Michko to drink tea. "Oh, why are you so pale? Have you put all the books away? What do you need on the list?" "Yes, everything," answered Camille. Her thoughts had wandered a long way from the library. "Thank you. I don't need anything." And she left quite a bit from the elderly librarian by the fact that she did not even say goodbye. And then the day of the test came. Christopher sat next to Camille, and she, gently peering, realized that he had not solved the problems and the essence of nonsense. Finally, everyone turned in their notebooks. Camille looked triumphantly at Stephen, who was sitting on the Kamchatka. She had no doubt that everything would be as it should be, that justice would prevail. He would lose. Would he keep his word to her? Would be forced to take the path of correction? Let him promise everything just to annoy her. But in the end, it will all come back to him in a positive way. It will. I mean, it can't be any other way. And then we learned that Christopher got an A, and that's when I really wanted to go under. Stephen found her, or rather caught her just outside the school gates, just grew in front of her, so she bumped into him again. "Hello." "Hello," said the girl and lowered her head to the moon. "What are we sad about?" "That it's not nice to lose, but it had to happen sometime. You can't live your whole life so right and perfect. You judge yourself. Step to the side." She tried to go around, but he wouldn't let her. "So let's not get into any of your notions. Okay, we had a bet. Now you have to do what we agreed. You know, it's kind of funny actually. If I were you, I'd be anybody else. I'm sure another girl could send me far and wide. But you're not like that. You gave your word, so here you go." He held out a piece of paper. "My father had a cottage in the suburbs. There's no one there now. I'm coming on Saturday night. You're not going to cry. Don't worry, I won't touch you. We'll have a great time. I'll buy you a barbecue." Camille opened her mouth to say that she couldn't come anywhere, because how could she possibly explain her grandmother's absence at night? She didn't even have any girlfriends she could theoretically spend the night with. But she didn't say anything, just bowed her head sluggishly again and wandered home. Stephen left the walls of the school with an ambivalent feeling. On the one hand, he had managed to achieve today what seemed to him to be unrealistic. On the other hand, he felt as if he had gotten dirty in something nasty and filthy. Camille was not like other girls, and for more than 1 year had been for him only an object of interested mocking observation. But then he began to notice things that the others did not see. How good she was always straight back haughtily, but not haughtily. And what a right word for her aristocratic head planting. This girl never gossiped about others, never brought a cheat sheet. It was clear that she didn't live an easy life, but no one heard her complain. She seemed to exist in her own closed, like a soap bubble world. At recess, she'd duck into a book and just go blank. And then one day she's walking by and notices Stephen's in a bad mood. And she threw something like, "No offense," she wouldn't understand. This phrase referred to a conversation Stephen had had about 10 minutes before with his geography teacher, who had reprimanded him in a scathing, yes, personal way, for not done homework, and did not want to listen to the fact that there was simply no time for it, because in the apartment at Stephen started renovation in the bathroom, and he could not refuse to help. In general, she always scolded her students harshly for everything. After her husband's salary, because as rumor had it, the lion's share of this salary he took away to his mistress. So she found someone to vent her anger on, and it was this statement of Camille Stephen that caught her. He did not ask for pity, and no one dared to tell him what to think and feel. He tried hitting her breasts in response, with taunts, but it had all been bypassed. He began to watch her more, and he himself didn't realize how it had turned into an obsession. Yes, that word seemed quite true to him. And Stephen didn't want to do anything about it. Why? After all, apparently, like so many other people, already had a certain idea of him. So why disappoint her? Even if he never had a chance to win her favor in kind. Well, so be it. But he'll get his. Camille was welcomed home. Familiar, adored Smell's grandmother boiled for a late lunch. Chicken noodle soup and fried pies of broken dough with black caviar. But before sitting down at the table at the very doorstep, Grandma questioned Camille about the grade her test was given at school. Only when she was satisfied with the answer did she tell her to fan out and wash her hands. Then they sat down to watch some old Musketeers movie on TV. Then Grandma, even though it was already 8:00 p.m., took the crystal out of the closet. I didn't have time to get through the morning, but it's necessary to do nothing at least in the evening. Hands from labor will not fall off, she said, giving the pupil an apron without on the couch, which was not avoided by any homework. Then Emily went to bed. Camille found herself left to herself. On the dial, the hands were getting close to midnight, inexorably approaching the coming of Saturday. She drew in a gasp of air and threw herself on the bed, closing her eyes. What was she to do? To break his word can be, of course, but hardly for such unfortunate behavior. She will immediately catch karma boomerang. That is, the well-deserved retribution from fate that her grandmother is so fond of talking about. And for some reason, Camille couldn't imagine what it would be like to exist afterwards. Not to mention that this very thing she'd signed up for menacingly sat up abruptly on the bed, then paced the room. Then a curse burst from her lips. Camille was more and more inclined to tell her grandmother everything and let her scold, let her punish. But then there would be a chance to make up her mind. What to do now? Grandma won't leave away. We'll say that, of course, there can only be a negative answer here. Granddaughter. The voice of an old woman in the corridor sounded. The girl flinched. Why is Grandma awake? She can't read minds. I think, granddaughter. Emily spoke in a hoarse voice. Granddaughter, repeated Emily in a hoarse, weak voice of the heart that she seized call soon. The ambulance arrived on time. The doctor said it looked very much like an approaching heart attack and hospitalization was necessary. Camille was thrashing around, gathering the things she would need at the hospital as instructed by her grandmother. Emily was taken away. Camille returned to the apartment, locked the front door, sank down on the hallway banquette, and covered her face with her hands and sobbed. What a nightmare everything was turning out to be, just a black streak. And at the same time, it was impossible not to recognize that this misfortune allows her to carry out her plans. After all, the grandmother will spend a few days in the hospital, which means that the fact that the granddaughter did not spend the night at home will not become known to her. Frivolous books, erotic movies. This was not on the cultural and educational menu that the grandmother had prepared for Camille. Naturally, the young girl had some knowledge of the relationship between the sexes, and the school program introduced her to the fact that children are not found in cabbage. And yet the girl realized that if she thought about the fact that she had a little more to do, she would simply lose her feelings. Theoretically, of course, in this, there was a plus date canceled. But there was also a downside. She would essentially be betraying her habit of being an honest person. Like today, you lied about being sick of the cutlet, and then you threw them away. My grandmother once reprimanded her, and for some reason that incident was particularly sharp in George's memory. And tomorrow the grandmother narrowed her eyebrows and slapped the very missing cutlets in front of the pupil. Are you going to steal? Or will you run over a man with a car? Yes, on a green light. Grandma, forgive me, please. Choking on tears, asked little Camille, you will not make me finish them. They were in the garbage pails. How smart are you? Emily stroked the girl's head and then grabbed her ear and pulled her from the table. Take them out and give them to the stray cats that live in the basement. Put your hand straight up and throw it down. Grandma, from fear, the girl even stopped crying. We do not have cats living under the house. Only the rats are there. I don't want to. Too late, dear, grinned the old woman. You have to take responsibility for your actions. And if a rat bites your fingers, she said, touching each of the 5 fingers on her granddaughter's left hand, it's your own fault. I'm a sweetheart. I'm ready to love all kinds of you. Even if you were crooked in the face, even if you got D's in school. But if I knew you were lying, I'll know you don't keep your word. You're gonna lie to me one more time. That's how you're gonna get me in the coffin. You won't have a grandmother anymore. You'll go to an orphanage. I'll live off you." After that, 10-year-old Camille realized that she would always be an honest person and would not break her word. To go and give herself into the hands of a monster in human form. Camille chose her weekend most dressy dress, snow-white Richelieu fabric, skirt, sun and sleeves, wings. She blocked her hair with a dark green ribbon over the dress, a light green shade, the young green foliage of cashmere. She decided not to think about what would happen until it happened. She decided to take things one step at a time. Gather herself and check that all electrical appliances were off. Leave the apartment and from her home at the bus stop. Take a bus to the station where the commuter trains leave from. Get off the light version of the train. And she was a little confused, but she was given directions. It was to walk across a field. It wasn't scary. There were other people walking there. Some merry company, a grandmother, a vegetable gardener. They were singing songs, and suddenly a strong young voice broke into their old chorus. The grandmother shared with an extraordinary companion, who was so young knew the words of an ancient Schlager, but immediately sang again. And so the whole company reached the dacha community. It was separated from a small village with the funny name of Jersey Pole, where in the old days they used to graze giant herds of cows, and now rare cattle kept by the locals. And a little farther to the south, the village and dachas were described by the river. In the heat of the summer months, it dries up almost to the bottom. "Who are you, sweetheart?" asked one of the old ladies. Yes, that one staggered off. Acquaintances asked to get something, and she waved her hand in the direction of generally towards the forest, not houses. "Well, happily ever after," the old lady said. Figured the girl didn't want to talk about herself. That's fine. Stephen's cottage turned out to be, and indeed, almost by the forest, stood on the very edge of the community, and it looked pretty abandoned. Camille looks like that. What a place to pick for a date. He couldn't ask her home either. She knew he didn't live alone. He was being raised by some distant relative. After Stephen's father was imprisoned for another theft a few years ago, Camille also knew that the boy's father had passed away last year. Then she sympathized with him and even tried to get close to him, to comfort him somehow. A man's grief. Maybe he realized her attention then. Wrong. He was imagining things. By evening, it was noticeably colder, and the girl chose her clothes according to the weather lunchtime. Still sunny and warm. But now it turned out not to matter at all. The fact that the body crept shivering. What was frightening was something else entirely. Finally, it was on the porch and knocked on the door. "Hello," he said, and a look of amazement flashed across his face, as if he was sure she wasn't coming. "Hi," she said, and thought that awkward mutual greetings like this were becoming a habit. And the group didn't want to make any habits with this guy. "Come in." He stepped aside, letting her into the house. The girl froze slowly, as if there was something nightmarish waiting for her beyond the threshold. However, that was essentially what it was. Inside, the house was just as she had expected it to be. It was in need of repair and cleaning. The furniture had been brought in on the principle that it was worthless. The floors were painted a luscious orange. Camille remembered that the same floors had been in her grandmother's village house. She'd only been there a few times, and then Granny had sold it. She didn't have the energy to travel to keep everything in order, and it was too far away to be used as a summer house. But the main reason for getting rid of the ancestral nest was that she needed money for her Camille nurturing. That's the word nurturing Grandma used. By the way, when she wanted to reproach her granddaughter, say, "I spend so much effort, you nurture, and you still manage to just shrink in winter, tear a new dress for walks, refuse to drink fish oil for immunity, do not remove. You put toys." The list of reasons for reproaches was endless, and only having grown up, or rather in 15 years, Camille began to think about the fact that not everything was her fault. Just sometimes her grandmother needed a fight, and the person with whom it could be done at will. She was the only one who could do it. So, do you want a drink? Stephen threw awkwardly as he led the girl into the back of the house. I don't drink. She dropped it and rolled on him warily. No, I don't. I'm already aware of that. I'm asking about tea. No coffee. No, I'm not asking for that. And you can. And Nastya got the purse handles first, so we switched knuckles. I know I lost the bet, and I keep my word. I'm ready, but can you hurry it up? The last word she threw at him angrily, determined to cross the distance between them. She stood close again, and he could almost feel her breath. So Stephen stared, dumbfounded. I realize I have quite a reputation, but why were you pouncing on me? What was the courtesan used to call these girls of such behavior? You see, it turns out we can speak the same language, and he smirked. Okay, that was an unfortunate comparison. I'm sorry, but what do you think? I jumped on you like a barbarian right here on the doorstep, threatening you without answering anything. Stephen sighed strangely and stepped back, shoving his hands into the pockets of his jeans. It was gloomy in this part of the cottage. The light poured in from the open door on the right, and there were two of them. The long hallway was junked. The living room was junked, or rather the living room was junked, because in principle there could not be a living room in the cottage. Camille was more inclined to the latter, if to take into account the fireplace, which, apparently, had not been heated for 100 years. It was so dusty with some kind of garbage inside, but she was much more interested in Stephen than in the surroundings. On the way here, her mind was drawing the most fantastic, disgusting pictures, and she imagined being at the mercy of a cynical, immoral scumbag. But for some reason it seemed that now she was just a boy who wanted to seem tough, like the bad guys in action movies, but he's desperately afraid of it. So you're shivering and you're gonna sneeze tomorrow. Apparently, the prolonged silence, in which they froze like two exhibits in an abandoned museum, began to irritate him. Come on, I'll put the tea on. Camille doomedly sank down next. What's all this for? What's to make me tea? It's logical, because you touched it. What does it matter if you're going to? What are you doing? A girl ran in. When Stephen pulled her sweater over her head, the guy froze. I rounded my eyes. She took a step back and still had her back against the wall and held her purse out in front of her in a desperate protective gesture. No, please, I'm not ready. A moment later, a scratchy woolen article of clothing flew into her face. Stupid. Hold it. It's cold to look at. Stephen, who remained in a t-shirt, turned his back to her and began to work on the gas stove. Put them on. I'm not peeking. The desire for warmth outweighed the embarrassment of using someone else's clothes, much less a man's. And Camille, tangling in the sleeves, pulled the sweater on. Thank you, she said quietly. So it's unlikely he heard. You know, I'm really surprised you came just to do a word of honor. It's kind of old-fashioned these days. I can't do otherwise, I shrugged, sitting down at the table. And if I were to argue something similar, like stealing something, it would never happen. Camille said smugly. Aha, so it's still within your moral framework. A teapot and a couple of cups were placed on the table. All three items clearly belonged to different services. That's not what I meant to say. The girl muttered. You cheated at all, caught me giving my word before I knew the terms. When he filled the cup, she put her palms around it. Though it was scary, hot, her body desperately needed to finally get a dose of warmth. Okay, I give up. I'm a scoundrel and a molester. But the end justified the means. He smiled and sat down next to me. There's nothing for tea, she asked timidly, suddenly realizing that her stomach protests against the empty drink and lunch and dinner for nervous thoughts, the ground as it was missed. There were chips and a chocolate bar, but I ate them while I was waiting for you. And the euros. Here's half a chocolate bar. He put the candy on the table. I see. For a while there was silence in the kitchen, where a lone light bulb shone. apart from the sounds of tea drinking. What was that? Was Camille suddenly alert? I didn't hear anything, Stephen said nonchalantly. Did I hear something that made you think there was someone else in the house? The girl went cold. No, you're lying. I'm not lying. There's no one here. The boy nodded at the doorway. Beside him, a puppy, a well-fed little thing that looked like a street Bernard sheepdog, peered into the room. He wiggled his nose funny and shook his paw. The first out of lively young curiosity. The second, because the paw was occupied by a screw. Oh, he's so cute. Camille flew off her chair and was at the puppy's side in a flash. Grandma's strict upbringing included, among other rules, one that said no animals in my house, no dogs in the street. They'll chew them up. They'll freeze. Lock-a-me. The puppy was taken aside, but then attracted by the fact that the stranger was wearing a master-smelling sweater pitched forward. Where'd he come from? When I was on my way here, he came after me at the station. He must have hurt his paw in the street. I swallowed a little. You'll keep him, or else. I have the right now. Unhappily, Stephen grinned. He'll live at the dacha for now, of course. When I leave here on weekdays, so he'll stay with the neighbors. I've already made arrangements, and then I'll take it all to myself. I've decided to rent an apartment. I'm looking for options to bring him back to where I live now. I can't just throw him out on the street. Stephen whistled, calling the dog, but the girl didn't let him make a move. Picked him up in her arms, went back to the table, slightly pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed the puppy on her lap. Billick stated a fact already known to the boy. Pretty as he was, he also reached out to pet him, and their fingers met in a thick laugh. And the laughter must have stayed on the train, because both of them felt a pang, a strange pulling sensation. Camille froze, eyes wide open, watching the guy's face grow closer. "How beautiful are you?" he whispered. The next moment their lips made contact. About the flu, I had read about the miracle of the first kiss, but she wasn't thinking yet how it could be hers, much less envisioning that it could be so dizzying. Like being dropped into the sky with this guy. And while the kiss lasted, she forgot all about the unhappiness with her grandmother, about the fact that he'd forced her into a terrible moral downfall, that she was entirely at his mercy. The kiss was interrupted for a trivial reason, and they realized they needed a breath of air. Immediately, the magic of the first intimacy vanished. Camille's hazy gaze was a dream, and now, instead of sweet tenderness, it read disgust and contempt. And Stephen, in response, immediately looked haughtily mockingly, so looks the winner on the coveted trophy, which has already managed to touch. And now the moment of total possession is at hand. I hate it. The voice didn't waver. The puppy, as if sensing the mood of people, jumped from her lap. Master of the place informed him master and dog kneeled. Somewhere in the hallway, stupid name Camille was now ready to say anything to hurt him. Other more graceful and sturdy expressions. She was still going through her mind. Didn't ask you. Risked the guy. Rising from the table, she shuffled out of her chair upward, weighed down, and did what all sorts of wilderness survival instructors advise against doing under any circumstances. Turned to the top predator in the house behind her back one moment, and he put his arms around her, turning her to face him. Or rather, pulled her to him, so that the fragile girl's hands pressed against his chest. The forces were, of course, unequal, and he in an instant broke her resistance in the loins. The girl was jabbed from the edge of the steel, and she wrinkled her nose, which he interpreted to his own understanding. A girl like you would never mess with someone like me. But still, you think I'd pass up a chance to at least give you a good kiss? Not a chance in hell. She was about to tell him everything she thought of him and his heartless wager, but only exhaled, clenched her eyes convulsively, realizing she was going to kiss again, and immediately opened her eyes. Hearing glass break somewhere nearby, Stephen heard it too, let go so sharply that Camille staggered. It was only because she clutched her fingers to the table to the point of pain that she did not fall that he cut the question short, pressing his finger to her lips. The girl was pierced with fear. It wasn't even a misunderstanding that something wrong was happening, but a pure underlying feeling. What might be called primitive intuition, for centuries guarding man from trouble. Is there someone in the house? Whispered Stephen, and extinguished the light in the kitchen quietly. Now they heard together in the far room of what was on the other side of the living room, the hallway. Someone was treading heavily. More than one person, it seemed. Damn it. Stephen sagged, and Camille glanced at him, wondering how, however, they could express themselves so similarly. The occasions, of course, were quite different. Thieves are thieves, for the girl whispered. That one has nothing to take, and usually climbs up to the cottages in winter, answered Stephen. And though it was almost dark, only the light of the moon slipped sparingly through the window. The girl could have sworn that he turned pale. Gotta get away. Must be summoned, she said. The telephone in that room, he muttered through his teeth and turned to her. It's yours. Camille quietly took her purse from the table. I opened it. I forgot it at home. Stephen waved his hand, whether to mean okay or not. What an idiot. Go on. Get out. Call the neighbors from them. And you asked the girl. The young men were already in the front of the house, and those who had entered it in the middle of the night, judging from the sounds, moved from a room that could be called a bedroom. Beyond the door, a narrow bed was visible. There was a covered veranda adjoining it, and also playing the part of a huge closet. All this Stephen appraised briskly, pondering what to do next. The door to the second room was still open when Camille entered the cottage, and apparently the puppy had gone out of there. And it had even returned. I'll get the master and come out too, the boy replied. No, you can't do that. With an unconscious gesture, she grabbed his arm and pulled him. Go already, fool. Shook her off him, and go already. Saying this, Stephen disappeared into the gloom of the room. Camille clasped his hands together. He is right. She should run and call for help. Why should she get in the way? After all, she hadn't come here of her own free will, and Stephen is not a good man at all. The girl went to the front door, opened it. Luckily, it didn't creak. It was brighter outside than in the house, and already from the porch you could see the warm light, the lights in the houses of neighbors. But at that moment there was a scream behind her. Camille rushed back and again, as if not realizing what she was doing, grabbed something from the stack of boxes, apparently prepared for taking out the change. Something heavy but comfortably lodged in the cramped palm of her hand approached the doorway. Grimly, she cautiously peered inside, and only by an incredible effort restrained herself from shrieking. Stephen was lying on the floor, with some scrawny type bent over him. His long arms frantically groped the guy, as if the legs of a giant spider made to taste his prey. What is it? A second type raised his voice. He was not visible at once, for he was standing at the other end of the room at the exit to the veranda. Nothing, answered arm's length hoarsely, curled into a cough. I guess Mio fooled us. No way. The second type swayed. And Camille, continuing her observation, it seemed that they were both drunk. It's got to be. The kid knows something for sure, but he's being sea-linged. What do you want to knit with? Hold on. I'll look. Camille backed up so she was hidden by the wall. She didn't plan. She didn't wonder how big her chances were. She had almost ceased to realize herself, and there was only one aspiration left. One decision: she can't leave here. That's the way with these villains. The girl could almost physically feel the threat coming from them. They were apparently looking for something, but that was unimportant. The moment the arm-length, chain-linked man stepped into the antechamber of the living room, a cast-iron skillet fell upon him. The blow struck him squarely on the head, and most of the weight of the cast-iron utensil fell upon his shoulder. The stranger howled, then grunted and collapsed senseless. Camille, before anything else could react, Sama rushed into the room and just threw the skillet forward at random. She was lucky. Those who had entered the house had not expected to find anyone other than the boy son of their longtime debtor. So they were confused, but the second guy managed to dodge. He darted into the veranda, Frightened by the attack, he did not rush to the aid of his accomplice because he did not know who else was here. Stephen moved and began to rise. Stephen ran. The girl rushed to him and suddenly jerked upward hard, helping him up. "I told you." The boy dropped his tongue behind his flying tongue and grimaced with pain. The blow of the bandit who had attacked earlier came in the jaw, and judging by the sensations, now it was impossible to do without a visit to the dentist. The villain, who opened on the veranda, had a flashlight with him. Its beam snatched the young men, and they turned around in sync. Accurately caught in the forest clearing by the light of the headlights, young Alyosha, "Ah," you foully swore and spat through his teeth, a man in the characteristic clothes of a prisoner. "The girl is still light. Where are you standing? Let's run, Camille. It's the end of you." And the convict took out from his belt something that glinted in the cold light of the moon like steel. They were separated by a few meters, 3 or 4 meters. Stephen came to his senses, and together with the girl, rushed to the exit of the room. He was not a coward, but he was not a fool to stay heroically in the house and engage in hand-to-hand combat. The puppy was yapping at his master's feet. He wasn't a coward either, but he was too young. And when they got into the house, he was just too scared. He scrambled under the one who cried his own way. And now, with 2 good acquaintances around at once, he took the risk of getting out. Camille took an extra couple of seconds to bend down and pick up the mala. "How you round your eyes?" Stephen, when they stepped over, or rather jumped over the louse on the floor of the convict. Such a thing he had not expected from his unwilling guest. But all questions could wait. Without collusion, and without wasting any more breath on superfluous words, young people with a puppy under their arm rushed out of the house and dashed across the lot to a neighbor's dacha. They didn't even turn around to see if they were being chased in. Ran out onto the porch for the door drums. "Help! Call the police! Help!" The events that followed merged into several long. Later we recall them as if through the fog of a clock. Alarmed neighbors came to the rescue. And soon those who had broken into Stephen's father's cottage in the middle of the night were captured. They were indeed, as Camille had immediately thought, escaped convicts. An ambulance and a doctor also arrived. After examining Stephen, he said that, in principle, it was nothing serious. The jaw was not broken. And that's the main thing. "Young lady, you don't risk it anymore." The doctor turned to Camille alone on such a big guy with a frying pan. "Dashing. But what if you'd missed? I can't imagine. What else was I supposed to do?" Now that it was over, Camille couldn't stop shivering, even though she was drinking the second mug of scalding hot tea. And 2 woolen plaids, given out by surly, unworthy neighbors, were thrown on her shoulders at once. Stephen disobeyed and looked out still into the street, just when the very convict who attacked him biked to the police car. Too bad he had no time to fight back. Stephen spat on the ground and threatened the man with his fist. He swore at the police. Walking with his feet, he rushed into the fight again. But naturally, no one let him. Stephen heard a couple more nasty things about himself and his father. "It's all clear," he muttered. He went back into the house and sat down at the table, leaning over his cup. Then he explained to Camille who it was. It turned out that 2 prisoners had escaped from the very colony where Stephen's father and his cottage were located. They didn't choose it at random. He liked to lie all his life, Stephen said. One could sense that he was both eager to speak out and uncomfortable with his own need for candor. And Georgia also noticed for the umpteenth time that Stephen calls his father he. But in principle, such an oddity was already familiar since the boy's parent went to the colony 4 years ago. Stephen almost never said either father or John. And here he lied, thinking it would add to his influence in the zone. Bitter. The young man grinned. He didn't keep quiet while he was still at home. He lied that there was gold buried in the dacha, which he stole back in the 90s. You can imagine, Stephen usually spoke about his father without emotion. But now, apparently, against the background of the experience, his intonation was combined with indignation. He lied to my little boy that there was gold in the garden. And I wasn't even then. I used to take a shovel and dig joyfully from fence to fence, from where I took strength. And he was laughing. So there's no gold? Camille asked. No, of course not. Yes, everyone was looking for it with metal detectors. About 10 years ago, they rented the summer house to some students. They heard all this nonsense and started to turn the place upside down, looking for it. And there was never any gold. It's that simple. He just couldn't accept that he was no longer the big bandit everyone feared, which he had once lost at cards. Mom left us back then. That's probably why he went completely off the rails. So he created the illusion that he had money. It's just not time to take it yet. What a bastard. Stephen raised his voice. Even before he died, he had time to shoot the whole psycho out there. How do I know that no one else will come here to this El Dorado on the outskirts? I'm fed up. I'm leaving. How are you leaving? Camille was confused. It was none of her business. And if she had the opportunity to go away and never see Stephen again in her life. But a little earlier, before this attack had happened, she would have gladly taken it, and would even have given much for such a gift of fate. But now she could not explain it to herself. She didn't want to get into the intricacies of her feelings, but she just suddenly realized that she cared about Stephen. It was discouraging, made her feel like a bad and spoiled girl. But Camille couldn't change that, even if she really wanted to. And you'll pass your exams. Stephen stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her nose. Wake up. What exams? What will this school give me? What about getting into the institute? She whispered. Woolen plates. Would they slip off my shoulders? But the girl didn't even notice, declaring them cool. Aha, an institute like me is lost. Nothing in life is ours for the taking. Stephen averted his eyes. No, you're not missing. You don't have to be. It's not like you have to be like your father, or that you have to live your whole life miserable. You can be anything you want to be. Now Camille's voice sounded firm and determined, as if she had to speak to a large audience, such as her own class, and she had something very important to tell them. What do you know about me? Stephen said this in his usual mockingly arrogant tone, but in his eyes he read a different kind of loneliness and lostness, as if he were suddenly alone in the world. Camille knew, in fact, that he was. She could have sworn that this guy didn't have any really close friends, the kind you trust like yourself, the kind who wouldn't let you go to waste. And then a thought struck like lightning. She does. A grandmother is different. A family member. She replaced mom and dad. But it's still different, and she has no friends of her own. Are you right? She answered. And I know the rumors, and what you said yourself. And that's not much. It doesn't have to be more than that. Stephen rose abruptly from the table. Shall we? Can I call you a cab home? And what else? Robert, neighbor and owner of the cottage, intervened in the conversation. He wasn't eavesdropping on the conversation. It's just that he had his own business with Sprouts and in the next room, and he happened to overhear a lot of things. Robert had known Stephen for 3 years, that is, exactly since he had bought the plot. At first he had thought Stephen was a guy, and a felon without 5 minutes. That was how the distant relative of the young man, who had become his guardian, had put it. But then Robert changed his mind. If only because no one in the cottage community and the surrounding villages could not recall any bad deeds in which Stephen was involved. If only because this kid had been seen doing good deeds here and there. He'd helped fix up one grandmother's cattle shed. In the village, he helped to find lost cats of some townspeople who came to the country house for summer vacations. He participated in clearing the pond of all kinds of garbage, and even once tamed a local gang of hooligans when they started molesting the girls' daughters of the owners of the lost cat. All in all, Stephen, in Robert's opinion, was a great guy. He didn't really understand what Camille had to do with him, and decided that she must be his girlfriend. Romantic interest, so to speak. Let's have a show. These seats are enough betting. I'll give you all kinds of stuff. 2 seats. Now we'll arrange the youth. We'll have tea in the morning." Robert waved his hand. "And then I'll give you both a ride to the station. It's a deal." Camille and Stephen nodded in agreement. That's how it was done. Glushenko, finally, you're back. Rushed to the girl looked out of the apartment across the street. Neighbor. "Good afternoon, Jenna." The girl smiled politely. "Yes, I slept over at a friend's place." She had already prepared a lie about the fact that this friend had a small child, and she had to go to the night shift. And her husband too. And that's until she gets the schedules just right. Looking for friends who will sit with the baby. But the next words of her neighbor almost made Camille faint. "I got a call. I know your grandmother well." Jenna spoke quickly. "The hospital called. They couldn't reach you." "Oh, what a grief. She was in good health, wasn't she?" "What? What's wrong with Grandma?" Camille was leaning against the wall in the driveway. "I got the call." So the neighbor was in no hurry to get to the point. Anyway, Emily took a sudden turn for the worse during the night. The doctors were frantic. "Oh, what a grief. You're all alone." The neighbor, the grandmother, stretched out. "Grandma, she's dead." Camille's hand went to her neck. "How hard is it to breathe?" It felt like the sky was going to collapse on my head. Isn't it ridiculous just like that? Was she far away from her grandmother in her last hour? No. Why would you think that? Ooh, spit it out. The neighbor waved her hands. "Don't you listen to me at all. What am I telling you? You're a fool. I said you're the only one left since Grandma went to the hospital. It must be hard for you to be alone." Anyway, by morning, she was feeling better. And I got another call to say they'd never seen a patient recover so quickly. They said she'd be home in a week. "Oh, why are you so pale? It's not even alive, Jenna." The girl shook her head and turned away and began to jingle her keys, opening the door of her apartment. "You can't talk at all. The whole neighborhood doesn't like you for it." And she went into her apartment and slammed the door rudely, without even saying goodbye to her neighbor. Jenna stood there with her mouth open. Camille had never allowed herself anything like that before. "However," said the neighbor. And then, remembering that she had put in the queen chicken for soup, yes, put the fire on high. Ouch, poked and ran away to her room. Grandma was indeed soon discharged home, and the life of the small Camille family quickly returned to the usual course. But then it became clear that something was changing. Camille often thought of Stephen. They hadn't seen each other since they had parted at the station. The boy said he'd take the next train. In the meantime, he wanted to walk a little longer and think about everything. Sometimes, walking down the street, caught herself looking for him with her eyes. Why? She couldn't explain it clearly to herself. But she remembered what he had said at the station. Before the train started, he'd said he was very sorry for her and apologized for the idiotic bet. "I thought I'd feel better if I got you." It only made it worse. He didn't explain anything else, just disappeared. Camille once thought maybe she could find him herself, just go to his house. Maybe he hadn't moved out of his family's apartment yet, but every time he pulled himself away from such pointless stupidity. Then, as the train pulled away from Camille, Stephen gave her a look, then tugged the puppy's leash lightly. Went for a walk. He really had a lot to think about. Time after time, he replayed the events of the previous evening, but not until the strangers broke into the house. When Georgia was still to come, Stephen could not find a place for himself. With his mind, he knew that he could triumph and get literally anything he wanted from her, except that his own recent impudence somehow began to seem like an unworthy dirty deed. And imagining what would happen when the girl crossed the threshold of the cottage, Stephen somehow could not in his own fantasies commit anything obscene. The most he imagined was a kiss. And this indecision, some silly modesty, only irritated him more. Then he belatedly also thought about the fact that, as promised then in the library, can tomorrow theoretically treat kebabs. Pork and marinade were standing in the fridge, but nothing. Now for evening tea, there's no such thing. it turned out quite invited the girl of his dreams cannot accept. The dog pulled sharply on the leash, thereby pulling Stephen out of his thoughts. "Ah, no," said the boy. "There's some geese grazing out there. Let's not go hunting them. Let's go in the grass over there, you little dog. It'll be like a jungle for you. Let's play." But even fun with Stephen's pet couldn't stop the thoughts from flowing. Only now they took a different direction. He suddenly remembered how many times his father had grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and, giving not fresh breath, said that they were of the same breed and that Stephen's destiny was to be a thief, a bandit, and that at 6, at 8, at 10 he had hated his father like that, fought him off, shouted that he would never do such abominations as he did, and his father would get furious and threaten to teach his son reason. And then, growing up, Stephen began to realize that many people were not ready to listen to him about what he was like on his own. It turned out that many people perceived him as the son of the very thief John from some house. Stephen faced the fact that children were forbidden to play with him. He was looked down upon in the local stores, as if he was 12 years old and all he could think about was stealing. Distrust, contempt. Stephen responded to all of this with muffled resentment. And then other feelings came in. Stephen became hostile to the world. He did not want to be like his father, but he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in John's shadow, as an extension of him. Stephen grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that he didn't need to ask about his mother. It was enough for him to have one frank conversation with his father, who told him that she had left him for a new family, where the husband was all right and rich, and where other normal children had already been born. That was enough for Stephen to realize that his mother was gone, as if he was a half-orphan with a living parent. And then it happened that Stephen found an understanding with a group of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. Somehow they got together, and it beckoned to him that these guys didn't suspect him of evil. They didn't bully him. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned. So he couldn't resist. Stephen, however, kept a little apart and did not participate in many of their scandalous antics. He was 16 when the leader of this kid gang said that they were not ready to be with them in everything. They don't need a man for one thing. Stephen stepped aside. Except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go anywhere. They grew like mountain grass, and now he couldn't. And he didn't want to fight them. In fact, he decided it was probably better that they'd be more afraid of him, less likely to hurt him. And for a while it seemed normal to exist like that. But now Stephen wasn't so sure anymore. He was sickened to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes around him. It was to the point of impossibility. Strangely enough, it was since he had started to get closer to Nina that he had been having these thoughts much more often. And after the events of that night, Stephen suddenly realized clearly he really could make his life anything he wanted it to be. It is only necessary to decide and quickly and definitively change everything. Despite the fact that final exams were approaching and free time had shrunk to the value of 0, Camille found a way to get a part-time job on Sundays. It was a lowly occupation handing out handbills to passers-by on the street, and it paid very little. But it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Camille made a difficult decision. How scary was it? But it was too late to back out. It seemed to her that she was on her way to fulfillment. She was drawn by some unknown force that was impossible to resist. The first thing Camille did was to go to the pastry shop and choose a cake, a very small 1/2 kilo. But as the saleswoman assured her, it was homemade and delicious. It was a honey cake with a black currant layer. And then she walked into the mall to a familiar clothing store. Camille stopped with a frantic drinking heart at the racks, above which appealing plastic letters folded into discount words. "Can I help you with something?" Camille flinched as the girl counselor approached her. It was the slightly familiar Evelyn. For the first time in her life, Georgia felt so keenly that she looked wonderful. In an old-fashioned dress below the knee, she looked like a scarecrow to herself. "And I'd like to try this on," she said and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoke, someone's gray knee-high dress made of knit fabric with a couple of pockets. In front of it, Camille picked it out because it cost $49, and she had exactly $20 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked then at the dress, which was on unusual clientele, then at the dress, then at the shoulders. "You'll excuse me, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled timidly. "We have these leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins who showed brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with flowers. "Accepted new collection. We just haven't had time to put these models on sale yet. If you want, I'll bring your size now." The counselor was very friendly. "One moment, please." Camille had no time to say not to worry, but the consultant disappeared and then reappeared. She was carrying 4 sundresses in different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Camille simply did not have the strength to refuse. As soon as these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on the girl. As a result, she came out of the examples, clutching a sundress with large flowers of 4 shades to her chest. "A lovely choice that suits you very well." Continued to count Evelyn, who immediately escorted just glowing with happiness customer to the oblique, and there ran S, escorted her partner into the depths of the hall to correct the clothes that had been unfolded all that day. Sam took it upon herself to count her out. "Thank you for helping me choose." Camille smiled. Her cheeks burned feverishly with a blush. "Thank you, Evelyn. Always happy to help update the look," she smiled back. What Camille didn't know was that Evelyn had already looked at her closely before approaching her and realized, because the girl had counted the bills several times, that the budget for the cover was quite tiny. Camille was not aware of the fact that the sundress she had chosen actually cost $250 with all the discounts. "So you owe exactly $50, the consultant said with a nonchalant look. Camille was already holding out the money, but her eyes fell on the cash register display. It showed the real price. Evelyn had hoped the girl wouldn't notice it, but Camille hesitated and looked uncomprehendingly. "It's the old price. The system knocked it down." She found it quickly. "Evelyn, that'll be $50. And seeing that the girl was slow, Evelyn herself collected the bill from her hands and also motioned to her across the counter, rustling a bag of clothes. "Take it, please, and thank you for the purchase." They exchanged a glance, and it was so quick, piercingly clear. Camille was bringing the package to herself, as if not believing in its material, tangible reality. "Thank you." And she walked out of the store. Before the girl who had performed the cashier's duties in the store that day returned to her seat, Evelyn had time to take out of her pocket the wallet that she simply did not risk ever leaving in the staff locker room of the mall, and put the missing $200 for the sold sundress into the cash register. If at those moments there was anyone who would ask her about the reason for such an act, she would not be able to clearly answer what moved her, but certainly not ordinary pity. She simply decided that it was the right thing to do. That it was the right thing to do. The thing was, it wasn't the first time Evelyn had seen Camille in this store or in town. They lived on the same street, and even their houses were close together, window to window. Evelyn was not a gossip, but if you didn't live as a recluse, you'd learn about a lot of your neighbors, and especially about the ones people said were strange. That's how you get to know them from afar, from the words of strangers. Evelyn was acquainted with Emily's grandmother and her granddaughter. Evelyn herself had been raised in a single-parent household by her grandparents. True, not because of orphanhood. Just parents were constantly on business trips or on hiking trips. In general, they lived their own separate from the native child, a rich life. But Evelyn's grandparents were quite modern people, and so for her Camille's upbringing seemed wild. But there was nothing to be done. Evelyn had been married for a long time. It was the 10th year of their marriage. It was a happy union. And in principle, her husband's income would have allowed her to be a housewife. But when son Kevin went to the 1st grade, Evelyn decided that she had enough of her recluse and got a job at this mall. especially since she'd always wanted a job that had something to do with clothes. Perhaps Evelyn sometimes thought it was something passed down from her grandmother, who had worked for almost 40 years. It was here in the clothing store that Evelyn had gotten the chance to get to know her grandmother and the flu, and on visits from an old lady and a teenage girl, who then turned into a young and beautiful girl. The whole store, as they call it, was painful to watch, because Emily, in her peculiar manner, now and then yanked her granddaughter. "Don't touch the tear. No, you will not wear that kind of work, and it's not made for you. Put it back. I don't spend the money, I decide what you wear." These were the phrases that accompanied their trips to the store for down jackets, seasonal, and other outerwear. The unhappy child was echoed by another salesgirl. And what will grow out of her with such a grandmother? Evelyn shook her head. She didn't know what to say. She felt guilty for some reason. They were strangers. It turned out that it was impossible to watch indifferently all these years as the grandmother grows her granddaughter, keeping her as from diapers in a cocoon of strange, frightening, giving a slight madness, care. Was this what Evelyn had done with the sundress? She suddenly realized that something special seemed to have happened in Camille's life, something immeasurably important that had motivated her to finally break the cocoon. Her grandmother said to Camille, "Let's have some tea." Back home, the girl hastily hid in her room and went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, put out tea pairs from a special ceremonial service, which in general, according to the rules, appeared on the table only on holidays, and on the calendar with magnetic bright squares. It was a very ordinary Sunday. "What's that?" The old lady frowned. "When did you make that speech?" "I didn't bake." The grandmother smiled at Camille and motioned her to the table. "I don't want you to be angry." "Okay, I decided on the weekend not to go out, not to the theater, and not to exhibitions, to go to the library. I did a little work." And Camille told her mentor what she'd been doing. "I just decided that soon I will finish school, and I need to get some experience, how to work." Emily sat down at the table, very distrustfully looked at the piece of cake, which her granddaughter put on her plate. "Grandma, it's natural, and it's fresh, it's true. But it is not always possible only to bake cakes. Sometimes you can. And how much did you make?" 100, answered Camille. "How much does a cake cost?" 50. "Where's the rest of the money?" "On Camille, I'm starving. My high school asked me to take a photo for the prom. I just said the first thing that popped into my head. And when Granny looked up, aroused blue eyes squinting intently, Camille had no doubt in those moments. She would be exposed now. But here Emily nodded. It used to be customary for elders to be asked what to do. "Oh, come on. What can I take from you? There's no work after school. Are you going to study?" The old woman finally put off the dessert with a spoon and took a piece of cake to her mouth. Granddaughter held her breath. "That'll do," said Emily, and did not utter another word during the tea party. And then she asked to measure her blood pressure and settled down on the sofa in front of the TV to watch a documentary about VDNK. The girl was happy that the cake was met favorably. The grandmother was simply amazed at her good attitude. After all, the last time Camille had brought her a store-bought cake to the hospital, she had thrown it out the window, screaming about how she wouldn't poison herself with palm oil. Maybe today's tea party is a sign of good things to come. Camille, housekeeper on trial, smiled at her thoughts. But then she remembered Stephen again. It seemed an eternity since that unimaginable incident at the cottage. And in all that time she had not seen Stephen. It was as if he had disappeared from her life altogether, vanished into thin air. The only thing that was certain was that he had dropped out of school after all. It was so little surprise to anyone, though. And the vice principal, not hesitating in expressions, prophesied to this bully the most terrible end, like his father. Camille did not agree with her and almost spoke out loud, but restrained herself, for it did not change anything. Who would believe her that Stephen was not really as horrible a person as everyone thought he was? Camille successfully passed her final exams, and finally, the big day of graduation arrived. Grandmother knew in advance that he would wear his granddaughter a dark blue velvet dress, which she once wore to the school graduation. Mom Camille this dress under the black silk sand now hung on her shoulders, on the door of the platinum closet. But yesterday's schoolgirl, getting ready for her main holiday now in front of the mirror, admiring herself in a very different outfit, that sundress with marvelous lush pink flowers. For the first time, Camille had not put her hair in a braid. Instead, she had twisted it into curls from the evening before. Logic, of course, was not at home, but she used an old folk trick, and the curls turned out with the help of ordinary socks. Granddaughter, what took you so long? Are you late? Camille flinched when she heard her grandmother, but the smile remained on her face, and she felt more confident than ever. And with another glance at herself in the mirror, she walked resolutely toward the door. Emily jerked back, and if she hadn't taken her heart pills this morning, she might have had a second heart attack. Because granddaughter, how did she look? Like she's not even her own. That's her Georgian. Grandma, I love you very much. The girl intercepted the old woman's hands, gently squeezed her cold fingers, wrinkles, and hands. But I won't go to my mom in that dress. I've bought myself a paycheck. I just can't live like this anymore. Grandma, it's not right. And so they stood opposite each other, the old generation and the young, the closest people to each other, who sometimes could almost read each other's thoughts, and at the same time very different people who belonged to different worlds. But here Emily, as noted lips and chin trembled, eyes darkened, hands withdrew and sighed deeply full chest. Exhaled through her teeth, Camille hid her hands behind her back, lowered her eyes. I won't be long, Grandma. I'll just get my diploma, take a picture with the guys in the park, and go home, Grandma. She took a timid step towards the door. I'll go. Okay, go, Emily said unexpectedly calmly. And don't be in a hurry. It's such a young thing. Stop. She stopped when the girl opened the door to the landing. Emily opened the soap box. It was an old ceramic box with roses on the lid. The soap that had been stored in it almost 100 years ago was also scented with roses. Now it was used to store cash, with which people used to go to the store to buy groceries, pay for light, and so on. Determinedly, the old lady emptied the box of its contents. There were about 3,000. She handed it to her granddaughter. As I recall, we didn't have a prom date, so tell whoever you need to tell. It's not out of favor that they're there to feed and water you. Granny, go already. The old lady interrupted her and waved her hands as if she had chased away a butterfly that had accidentally flown into the house. Or we'll be late. Camille left. Emily returned to the hall and sank into her favorite chair. Arms settled on the windowsills. She closed her eyes. Quietly, the clock flowed from beneath the closed ones. Tears rolled down the old woman's eyelids. But it was a light sadness. It was just a sudden realization that everything had grown up. Her granddaughter, though she tried to keep her from stupidity and temptations of vices of this world. I guess people are right. It's impossible to hide it from young people. Well, it remains, then, to hope only that it will not do any harm at all, that at least a little John in her head was able to put. And then Emily dozed off. Classmates saw Camille in the update, but the main thing in unusual such a form did not immediately recognize who was in front of them. For a while the cheerfulness died down and all eyes were fixed on the one who had come. Some of the guys whistled, and many girls looked at her with envy. It turned out that this girl had a gorgeous figure, and her hair was usually hidden in tight braids. Now she had lush silk curls. Camille. Anatoly Vladimirovich, the headmaster, approached the girl. Are you gorgeous? He simply spread his hands. I wouldn't be lying if I said that I had never seen a more beautiful graduate in my memory. Much later, looking back on that day, Camille understood that its bright events merged in the end into one long action, like multicolored glasses in a kaleidoscope are folded into one pattern. But this was true of the day until the moment when, after a walk in the park, a familiar voice suddenly called out to her. The sun was already slanting toward sunset. Its fiery golden rays penetrated the green of the trees and still blinded. So Camille squinted, and the silhouette of the guy standing nearby turned out to be quite blurred. "Stephen disbelieving," she said. The rest of the graduates didn't even notice her slipping away. Their first impressions had time to dissipate, and they were more interested in each other's company, leaving the oddly familiar to their high school roommate. As in years past to herself, Stephen stood at the entrance to the park, again in ripped jeans. But the jacket was a new brownish red and true to size. "Congratulations," he said and smiled. "Did you drop out of school after all?" the girl said reproachfully, although when she almost ran towards him, she wanted to say something else. "Busy. I had an apartment to sell and a summer house." He glanced from top to bottom and smirked back. "You're pretty, aren't you? Well, I'll leave you to it." He nodded at the group of school children in the distance. "I don't mind," Camille replied. "I guess I don't fit in after all." "You don't have to," said Stephen. "You'll find people you feel comfortable with." It was a strange word, and a phrase for him in general. Camille squinted. "So you've decided to leave after all?" "I have to find my place somewhere." "Okay." He clearly wanted to say something else, but he faltered and retreated a step. "Good luck, Camille. I didn't get a chance to say what I wanted to say." What do they need to talk about? That he's not completely alone. That she has to understand. Just has to find out how to help him and... But all these thoughts were born in her mind. She couldn't put it all out coherently right now. She could only stare at him. How she needed him to take the tiniest step towards the tiniest drop himself. But he sent her a mesmerizing stare instead. His face contorted stiffly. And he, turning around, simply rushed to run to the bus stop. A shuttle bus stopped there, and at the same time it seemed painfully clear that he was not just rushing toward the shuttle bus, but that he was running away from it, and from the conversation that could have taken place between them. Figures of swans surrounded by live snowy white hyacinth with flecks of icy pink, and we were beautiful. And if the organizers of this wedding reception had been asked to name the most successful element of the banquet decorations imposed, she would have pointed to these ice sculptures, rhythmically nodding a mini pen on the spread of a notebook, the entries in which were such small abbreviations that only their creator was able to decipher it. The girl looked at her creation magnificently. Thanks to this order, she would finally close the mortgage for the apartment. And also, perhaps, after it I can treat myself to a vacation, in which I have not been for the last 2 years. With a satisfied sigh and a nod to her own reflection, Camille returned the writing utensils to the pocket of an immaculately modest tailored, smoke-something gray. The jacket that made up the set with a pencil skirt, plus the silk blouse of a delicate lavender hue, was stylish but not overly dressy. After all, she is a responsible person here, and in no case should not compete with the bride or even the guests. "Guys, this way." There was a voice behind her through the open door. Camille's eyes widened. Some workers with a stepladder and some other guy in a black suit entered the room. "Over there." The guy stretched out, pointing at the wall. More precisely, on that part of it, which was located behind the seats for the young, and was generously traumatized with silk and spoil, the folds of which were supported by golden Cupid figures. "Hey, what are you doing?" Resentment flooded in. "Trespassing on her domain. Girl, don't you dare touch anything here." The workers stopped and turned to their superiors, and the superiors to her security detail. Through a tall brunette and stuck his thumbs behind the belt of his pants smirked. It came out extremely cocky. "We're working. Please do not interfere. Do not interfere," indignantly flashed Camille. "Yes, do you know how long we've been laying this down? What do you think you're doing? Why didn't I do anything?" And then she was silent, because the young man's face seemed familiar. Stephen. Apparently, the mutual recognition came to them synchronously. "Camille," he said, "what are you doing here? A wedding?" She answered simply and, in general, quite matter-of-factly. "What are you doing here?" I'm working too, he said. So what are we doing? Asked one of the workers. Yes. Wait, you. Stephen brushed it off and focused his attention back on the young woman in front of him. He had remembered her all these years, while he had been busy putting his life back together in a shard. And she remembered him too often, more often than he would have liked to remember a guy he knew from high school, not even a classmate. A close encounter that had taken place under less than romantic circumstances, but that had been in the past. And now they exchanged a few more phrases, and it turned out that Stephen was the head of security of David's fiance's father, a complicated man, a businessman, and even an oligarch. Stephen had spent almost all these years in other parts of the world, and then to work in a solid reputation in the security industry, decided to return to the city, which still considered the most native place. And this is where he eventually found his best job. I never would have guessed, Camille said frankly, when Stephen told her what he was doing. Well, of course, with my pedigree and track record, he replied. And it was not clear whether he was really offended or whether he was being kindly ironic about himself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Camille immediately fell into confusion. It's okay, it's so familiar. It's like all those years of separation never happened. Stephen smirked. And you, then, are the creator of all this. He circled the space with his hand. It's pretty, but of course, terribly girly, if you know what I mean. Not at all. Camille had always been very sensitive to criticism of her creations. She could only speak calmly about anything and everything directly to her clients. But the rest of us would be better off holding our tongues. Camille herself often regretted her temper, but found a reason for it. Apparently, it was inherited from her grandmother's temper. And the decoration is created taking into account the tastes and wishes of the bride and groom. Our agency is oriented on the current world trends in the field of wedding fashion, said the girl. Wait a minute, you bowed your head. What, you're married and you're doing things with your husband? Do you think that's the only way to do it? Did Camille frown again? No, it just occurred to me. He scratched the back of his head in a familiar gesture. I'm not married. That's wonderful. What do you mean? Never mind. So you started an agency with someone else, and you do weddings. Mostly them. But we also do wedding anniversaries, engagements. Do you do divorces? No. Camille was in such a weird state of mind talking to Stephen that she missed the ringing of her cell phone. The girl carried 2 miniature smartphones with her. The second one contained only personal contacts, and before such a neglectful part to her professional duties was not peculiar to her. Who would ever think of celebrating a divorce? I don't know, he shrugged. I went to the sea for 2 weeks to celebrate. I just lay on the sand and matured to move on with my life. I asked about you and thought that if you like weddings so much, you should probably be married already, maybe even more than once. Why is that? To the first impressions of the meeting, delighted surprise and even excitement, heart palpitations begin to be joined by the familiar irritation of mere déjà vu. So it's weddings. How many different ones can be played, given the opportunity and imagination? Stephen spoke in a completely serious tone, but his eyes were laughing. I'm not married and haven't been yet, Camille replied, and nervously fixed her already perfect hair. The girl now wore a bob haircut. So what do you need to do here? From the cameras lost the image of the hall. Apparently, you didn't cover it up with your fancy stuff, so put the camera somewhere else. This is a perfect angle. That's not my problem. The design's already been thought out and you can't change it. Who cares where the bows are? This is about safety. What, you're afraid of the bride being stolen? Don't worry. It's not in the script. I don't know anything. Stephen was suddenly dangerously close, literally hovering over her. With all his weight, Camille thought, inappropriately enough, that he had grown noticeably bigger or shoulders heavier. It's been 10 years, Stephen said. You haven't changed at all. Very much. The girl felt awkward, and for some reason she was sure that it was treacherous, and the blush was clearly visible, despite the tone, except Anna and powder. So what to do? One of the workers, who had a lot to do, couldn't stand it. It's scheduled for this day. Camille and Stephen backed away, just bounced off each other, as if to scare them off. The flock of birds scattered, and soon, with Camille's instruction, the textile decor was moved so as not to block the CCTV cameras. "Now it's all ready smugly," said the girl, and Stephen visibly perked up. "Then we can talk." Camille wanted to say that she was terribly busy, but that would be untrue. And besides, she herself wanted to talk to the man who made her heart beat. So strange. Often, all these years, it was still hours before the wedding reception at the bride's father's mansion, and Stephen and she had agreed to sit on the back porch of the house for a little while. It was the quietest place now. They sat down directly on the steps, the English-style garden in front of them disheveled as if wild, but in fact artificially grown. Camille talked about how, after studying 2 years at university to become a philologist, she had realized that it was absolutely none of her business. And it was. Decided to take a big risk just to make a living for a while, as it turns out, and in parallel to look for herself. In the end, it turned out that she liked to create holidays. And 5 years ago, she and Evelyn created a small agency, which by now has become one of the leading agencies in the city. Evelyn. Stephen was surprised. The one whose husband's an electrician, and they have a son, Kevin. "I remember her. She always treated me differently," he added, and he averted his eyes differently than the others. "I know," Camille nodded. "She and I were talking about you the other day, and she told me all about how you weren't a monster at all. And when you reminded me, you thought I was a monster." He squinted as if with a grudge and invited me to the cottage. I swear, I smiled menacingly. It was the most nightmarish date of my life and mine. I'd give anything to have it any other way. I mean, what kind of idiot was I, anyway? I should have just asked her out to the movies properly. I mean, you don't have to be afraid to say no. "I see." The girl nervously sent a strand of hair behind her ear. The conversation had suddenly turned into a direction that was not the most convenient for a free conversation. "How's your grandmother?" Stephen asked. "She's fine. I'm amazed at her age, and she's still chipper. Her health, of course, sometimes fails her, but she's strong enough for 10 people. You know, it's only recently that I've been able to understand her. I thought when I was just out of high school that I was out of the nightmare. And then I realized that she just loved me so much and thought it was to protect me. I spoke to the doctor. Grandma is seeing a psychologist," Camille explained. She agreed to see him to find out why she was having bad dreams. And then somehow he got her talking. And it's made our life together easier. Anyway, the psychologist doesn't want to scare her, but he said it's kind of an obsession. She was lucky she stopped in time. "You know, I feel so guilty sometimes for leaving my grandmother alone for so long. But I got her a nurse, a very decent woman. She takes good care of her. Now Grandma doesn't need anything." The girl saw the skirt on her knees. She looked carefully at Stephen, catching his gaze. "How long have you been divorced?" "Last year. I told you. We didn't see eye to eye. I guess I'm just not a good person. For some reason, I thought you'd changed since then, and not for the worse. So I don't think you're a bad Stephen. And your mother? She was careful. Do you know what's wrong with her?" "I mean, you didn't think of me finding her," Stephen replied. And it seemed that he was ready to answer frankly to this question, but only wanted to get off as soon as possible. We talked calmly, peacefully, and she apologized and told me not to show up again. She really has a whole other life. I don't belong there, but I forgave her. That's it." Camille fell silent. They just sat side by side and watched the wind move the tall, lush grasses and the flowers among them. I had completely forgotten. The Magister exclaimed menacingly. "He is a solid age for a dog of a dozen, but he is fine." Stephen smirked. "He actually lives here with me. He's in the enclosure now. Do you want to say hello?" He stood up and gave his hand to the girl. "I do." She stood up, accepting his outstretched palm. "Do you want to bet?" Stephen rounded his eyes. This was something he hadn't expected at all. terms. The master will recognize me at once, and then you'll give me a personal tour of the place. Tell me, what does the security service do? I only know from the movies. You walk around and talk to someone on the radio all the time. Yes, Stephen almost answered. And if you lose, then you can take a chance and ask me out. The young man grinned. It was a very tempting offer. And whatever the outcome of the bet, he somehow had no doubt that the date would happen, and it would be very easy to turn it into an excursion. Stephen also thought about the fact that he might just have to become a really good guy now. It was necessary to become a good husband for Camille.